Our story begins in the academy with an explosion. Our protagonist Haruto was thrown to the ground, and a man teasingly told him that he hadn't realized he was there. The man with green hair then asked him if he really just got hit by elementary magic and told him that he was fucking amazing as he struggled to stand up in pain. When he managed to stand, he asked the man as it wasn't enough and told him to return it to him as promised because he had brought what he asked for. The man raised the bag of food and told everyone that it was the fresh sirloin burger, the famous limited school lunch with only 50 pieces sold per day. He confirmed that he did get enough for all of them, but the green-haired man asked him where the drink was. The man retorted that he should have been more considerate, then releasing a fireball in his hand, he threw it at him while shouting that, as punishment for not bringing drink, he should have another serving. This hit him and made him fall to the ground once again. He then stood up again while the men teasingly told him that, as they expected, he was exceptionally weak. Suddenly a lady furiously asked the men what they were doing. The men noticed that it was Shinano, and they all knew that she was part of the disciplinary committee. The man then threw his cell phone at his face while shouting for him to be grateful. It was all he had for today. The cell phone cracked when it hit the ground. Shinano rushed to him and called in worry. As he was picking up his phone, she asked him if he was okay, but he told her to stop and that she'd be excluded as well if she hung out with him. She sadly told him that it wasn't something she cared about, but he angrily told her that they couldn't survive in that place if they hung out like they did when they were little. Then he walked away, leaving her sadly calling his name. He then walked into the building, and the students whispered that he was the special admissions student. They asked how he managed to enter such a prestigious school when he has zero magic capacity. They also whispered that they had heard there was an error in the scoring system, and wondered if he had a stand-in to take the exam for him. Although Haruto doesn't want to admit it, he can't deny the rumors questioning how an underachieving student like himself got into that prestigious school. One day, out of nowhere, his parents suddenly informed him of his admission as a special admission student, and even if he had wanted to ask them why, it was too late. He looked up at the sky and wondered if maybe he should have died along with them. That day Haruto was admitted to the school with zero magic capacity, so he couldn't major in the mage course. Consequently, he was forced to become a swordsman, and in the current society where magic is overwhelmingly dominant, he was considered useless, only able to fight in melee range. Being the only survivor in his family and a constant burden in dungeon raids, they gave him the nickname the God of Plagues. After his class, he returned to his apartment building and opened his door, but before he walked inside he noticed a letter on his door. He sat down holding the letter and noticed that there wasn't a stamp nor a sender's name, but he decided to open it anyway. When he peeled back the sealed sticker, he was surprised as a powerful light emanated from it. The light enveloped him while he was in shock, and eventually the letter dragged him inside. He opened his eyes to find his surroundings were colorful, which made him anxiously ask where he was. The water he stepped on parted and a shadow emerged. The shadow, smiling, told him that it was the year 2054 according to the Western calendar, and asked if he was indeed the 16-year-old Kazuo Haruto, to which he stutteringly replied yes. Shadow told him that his name was Kazuo Haruto and that he was him from the future. He explained that he was sending the letter from the future and that in 10 years he would become a mage, able to manipulate space and time. However, waiting that long was too much, so he decided to train him right there and then to become a grand mage of space and time. Haruto stared at the shadow, wondering what the man was saying. His future self told him he knew he was skeptical because he was him, but insisted that a picture was worth 1,000 words and just once he should do as he tells him. His future self then instructed him to enter the F-ranked dungeon, Shinjuku Imperial Garden, alone, and said he would speak to him again after he had done it. The shadow then disappeared. A moment later he entered the Shinjuku Imperial Garden, an F-ranked dungeon. He knew that a clear dungeon like this one didn't really have anything worth taking. He then told his future self that if this was some kind of prank, he should know what would happen. His future self replied that he could burn and tear the letter as he liked, and instructed him to go straight and turn right at the end, clenching his teeth in frustration. He followed the directions, and a moment later he faced a wall. He told his future self that he had reached a dead end and asked if he could burn him now, but his future self simply told him to put the letter into the slit in the wall. He sighed and inserted the letter into the slit. To his shock, the slit lit up and the wall moved aside, creating enough space for him to walk through. He walked inside, having never heard of something like a hidden route. Suddenly something bright lit up the dark, hidden space, and then he saw a huge crystal tied by a chain. His future self told him that it was a skill cube and asked him if it was the first time he had seen one. His future self then ordered him to touch it and acquire the skill. He walked closer to it with apprehension and touched it, but then his future self apologized to him. Suddenly the skill cube cracked and turned red, then a purple light appeared around the skill cube, and a hole opened above him. It began to suck in the blocks around him and started to form something in midair. When it finished sucking in the blocks at high speed and forming the object, the smoke slowly disappeared, revealing a huge form in front of him. He was stunned in horror when he saw glowing eyes, and then a golem jumped closer to him. It stared at him with its one bright eye, and he wondered if it really was a golem. But then it attacked him, swiftly hitting him and throwing him away, in pain with blurry eyes. He wondered what was happening and if he had been scammed. Suffering severe injuries, he felt hot and realized that his entire body was burning. He noticed his consciousness fading and wondered if he was going to die. He then looked at his phone, sought images of his mother, his father, and his little sister Ria, and told them that he could finally be with the rest of them. But then the letter lit up, and his future self asked him if it was okay. It reminded him that he was a failure at the school his parents had enrolled him in, and that he was going to die a pointless death after being scammed by him. It then asked him if he was really okay with that, which jolted him back to consciousness. He remembered his miserable life where nothing good ever happened. However, he realized that it was just his life, and he had convinced himself that this was how it was supposed to be, so he had given up. He replied that there was no way he would be okay with it, and it told him that if that was the case, he should resist, survive resiliently, and change his miserable life. When the golem's attack was about to hit him, he didn't avoid it and was killed, but he still managed to defiantly tell it not to mess with him. In a place like this, suddenly, the system displayed a hidden quest in the Shinjuku Imperial Garden, an F-rank dungeon, and he had met the requirement for the Mage of Space and Time's indomitable spirit. Therefore his adventurous death was cancelled, and his physical body would undergo a rollback. He then opened his eyes, confident that he would survive. When he met the requirements, the skill cube shattered into pieces, releasing a powerful force that headed straight for where he was lying. The powerful force hit him directly, and in the golem's eyes, he was standing. His body was surging with strong electrified power. The system then showed that he had acquired space-time magic, along with quick body material, rewind and stop chain. It also indicated that he had obtained the space-time mage passive skill level 1, potential unleashing with a plus 30 boost. However, he just looked at his hand and asked, "What the hell is this?" His future self explained that taking a shortcut to his awakening required potentially fatal, harsh conditions. His future self then apologized for not informing him beforehand. He revealed that space-time magic would not be discovered for another 10 years because it was part of a hidden quest that until now, only he had encountered. He asked his future self if he was really from the future, but his future self simply told him that he looked alive now and that the tutorial was about to start while the golem behind him was ready to squeeze him. When the golem launched an attack, he felt it and immediately looked back, managing to jump away in time to dodge the golem's hand. He then noticed that his body felt so light, making him wonder if it was the effect of the passive skill. His future self told him that he would teach him how space-time mage is supposed to fight, and that he shouldn't use his eyes to see, but just feel at the flow of time that rules the world. He followed the order, and his future self probably told him that he could absolutely do it because he was him after all. The golem launched its huge fist at him, but he didn't move and tried to concentrate, feeling the flow of time when the golem's fist was an inch away. He opened his eyes, stared into the golem's eyes, and jumped away in time to dodge it. He then activated his space-time magic and landed on the golem's hand. Using his quick body, he jumped in front of the golem, ran up the golem's arm, and when he reached the top, he launched his sword at the golem's head while telling the golem that it must be its core. He then plunged his sword into the golem's head and pushed down with all his strength, cracking the core inside its head. Gradually, the golem's head cracked further until it exploded into pieces. He descended to the ground and walked away while the golem's body shattered behind him. After defeating the golem, his level increased by 4. His swordsman skill by 8, and he obtained 45,800 credits. As he stared at the system, his future self asked him if he believed him now, and called him God of Plagues. He gripped his sword tightly and replied that somewhat he did. His future self then told him that for the next necessary step, he should exit the dungeon. He asked his future self if there was still something else left to do, to which his future self replied yes, and that there was just a little deed he had for him to make. They were going to where Shinano would be killed by a monster today. He stopped walking upon hearing this, and was shocked when he realized what was said. He then asked his future self to repeat what he had said. His future self explained that he was talking about his childhood friend Shinano, who along with some friends, would enter the Cairo D-rank dungeon today and be killed by the extra boss monster. He positioned his feet, as his future self urged him to go save Shinano and change the future. His future self then called him a mage of space and time. As he rushed out of the dungeon, while he was rushing, his future self told him that on May 23, 2054, in the Western calendar, in the deepest part of the Cairo D-rank dungeon, an unexpected appearance of a C-rank extra boss would result in the death of Shinano Rin. Despite her party member casting a rescue spell, there were no other adventurers around, and hence they were completely wiped out. Although Shinano wasn't entirely at fault, before his future self could say more, he shouted at him to shut up. A moment later he arrived in the Apkiro D-rank dungeon. Exhaustedly, he asked his future self why he hadn't said anything earlier, but his future self merely asked him back if he wasn't the one who had wanted to avoid associating with anyone else, because anyone he came into contact with would meet with misfortune. He reminded him that this was also the reason why he was rather comfortable being shunned and asked him why he was so angry on another's behalf. Suddenly he was stopped by a momentary pause as goblins surrounded him, but his future self told him to stop, acting as if he had suddenly become enlightened. He grabbed his sword from behind his back, and when the goblins leaped together to attack him, he slashed them swiftly. His future self told him that the world could be changed by his actions, but he just told his future self to shut up and that he would do whatever he wanted. His future self replied that he understood and that this was the response he was looking for. As a reward, he would teach him an application of space-time magic. Meanwhile, on the deepest floor, a huge explosion could be heard along with screams, and Shinano was thrown into midair. She slammed onto the ground while her friends watched in horror. They worriedly called her name, but she couldn't stand up because of the pain. When she opened her eyes, she saw the C-rank extra boss, Dark Sentinel, in front of them. A man shouted that they hadn't been informed about it, and a lady who was trying to call for help shouted in panic that it was no use because there was no response to the rescue spell. Another lady urged them to calm down and told them that if they all attacked at once, they had a chance of winning, but the man stutteringly replied no, that he couldn't do it and that he didn't want to die. Dark Sentinel lit its huge sword while the lady shouted at the man that now was not the time to be saying something like that. But then Dark Sentinel swung its sword toward them and it hit all of them, throwing them into midair together. Shinano managed to sit up and was shocked to see that all her friends were down on the ground. Many had collapsed, but then she saw one of her friends still alive and begging for help, so she pushed herself to stand and attack the Dark Sentinel. With her firepower she managed to hit it in the head, but it didn't even scratch the Sentinel, leaving her stunned in horror. The Dark Sentinel raised its sword and as it swung down toward her, she closed her eyes in tears and shouted for someone to help. Fortunately, he appeared just in time and used his stop chain skill to halt the Dark Sentinel's attack. He then asked her if she was alright. She opened her eyes stunned to see him there, but he simply faced the Dark Sentinel and told her to stay back. He deactivated his stop chain skill, grabbed his sword from behind, and jumped away to dodge the Dark Sentinel sword. He then jumped behind it and as it turned around quickly to attack him again, he blocked its attack with his sword and swung at its stomach, knowing that was the spot, but his attack was merely blocked by its armor, making him realize it was too hard. The Dark Sentinel launched another attack, which he blocked with his sword, trying his best to compete with it. Unfortunately, his sword cracked under the force and broke in half. The Dark Sentinel stared at him in anger, making him curse under his breath. It then gathered power from its eyes and pointed it at him, releasing a strong power that caused an explosion. Using his quick body skill and time, he ran away and appeared behind it. Knowing that his sword didn't work on its armor, but was effective on parts not covered, he realized he needed to focus on its head. The Dark Sentinel turned around, and he immediately launched his broken sword at its head. His future self reminded him that his sword was going to break, but he simply replied that he knew. He then used his material rewind skill, and as his sword began to repair itself, he launched it at the Dark Sentinel's head, which was gathering power again. The tip of his sword struck the Dark Sentinel's eye just in time, piercing through to the helmet. The head then became powerless, and he managed to land safely on the ground. His future self then told him that it seems he had changed fate itself, while Shinano stared at him in shock and confusion. A moment later, Shinano rushed to him, asking what in the world was going on and shouting at him to explain. But she decided to thank him first for saving her and her friends. He told her not to worry about it and pleadingly asked her if she could keep it a secret for now. She thought for a moment and asked if, in other words, that would be a secret just between the two of them. He confusedly replied yes, that it would be like that. She smiled upon hearing it and then asked him what the source of his strength was. Earlier he was about to reply, but his future self told him that he wanted to keep future branching routes to a minimum and abstain from making any careless comments about space-time magic. He stopped upon hearing his future self, but asked Shinano if she could keep what he was about to tell her a secret too. She looked at him in confusion, but he explained that a lot was going on and he didn't want to stand out. His future self then suggested that he should deceive her somehow, which Shinano overheard and asked if the voice she just heard was him. Shocked, he replied that it was not him at all and he didn't know what she was talking about. He then glared angrily at the letter and swore to kill his future self later for it. He sighed and told Shinano that he wanted to try out a special swordsman skill he had been training with forever, but since it was still incomplete, it wasn't something to tell everyone about. She smilingly replied that she understood, and if that was the case, she would keep the secret, making him sigh in relief, knowing that he had somehow managed to deceive her, just like that Shinano Ren's supposedly fated death was averted, and at the same time, Haruto was able to obtain overwhelming magic and power. Naruto knew he couldn't change the past, but he could continue to change what was yet to come. Suddenly someone called him God of Plagues, and when he looked back he saw the bullying man at the door, calling him and teasingly laughing at him. A moment later one man told him that he went into the Akayu Kuro dungeon yesterday, and a guy he happened to see told him that he just ran home, powerless without being able to be of any use. Another man teasingly told them that it seemed they even ran into an extra boss and had to take a training session with it, which made them laugh. The man asked his friends if it was expected of the God of Plagues, but Haruto was just busy wondering who the witness was besides Shinano. The man then told him that a buddy of his was also there and ended up being carried to the hospital with severe injuries, so the hospitalization expenses would be hefty. The man then gestured for money and asked if he understood what he meant by that. He then demanded that he pay up, and in return, they wouldn't tell anyone about it. The men then asked him what he had to say, but he remained silent, infuriating them and prompting them to demand he say something. The man then conjured a fire in his hand and reminded him that he would become their target for practicing attack spells again. He shouted that he had had enough, which made the man stretch his hands in anger and ask him to repeat what he just said. Defiantly he reiterated that he'd had enough and asked them if they were deaf pieces of trash, which enraged the man and his companions. They launched an attack at him in anger while calling him a bastard. But he was thankful for his increased stats, as he could clearly see the scumbag's movements. He then swiftly attacked them one by one. He stopped behind them. They all looked around in horror, wondering what was going on. He told them to listen well and warned them not to come near him ever again, or else the same thing would happen. He was holding their wallets and a lighter. One of the men shouted that those wallets were theirs, but he simply lit the lighter and told them that it was a promise between them and him. He then seriously asked them what they said, to which they all nodded in fear. After that they all ran away. He thought they wouldn't mess with him anymore, and decided to go back to his class. A moment later he was sitting in the class, noticing that their next class was magic capacity measurement. The teacher announced that they would begin that semester's magic capacity measurement immediately and called his name. He replied yes and stood up to walk to the front. He knew that his intrinsic magic capacity was almost zero, but he wondered how things would turn out now that he was a space-time mage. He decided to try pouring some space-time magic into the mirror. As a test he placed his hand on the mirror and infused it with his space-time magic. After that he opened his eyes, and the teacher was stunned in confusion when a bright light emanated from the mirror. Suddenly the mirror exploded and shattered into pieces, causing the teacher to fall to the floor and leaving the students in shock. He realized that he shouldn't have done something so dramatic because it made him stand out unnecessarily, while in the background Shinano giggled. After school, as he exited the building, he heard students whispering, asking if he was the God of Plate, who had destroyed the measuring device. They murmured that further inspection revealed it was a form of unknown magic, but other students couldn't believe it, knowing that if it were true, he'd be above rank. He thought about how different this gossip was from what he used to hear and felt it was much more exhausting. Suddenly someone called out to him, so he looked around confused. The voice then beckoned him into the bushes, and what emerged made him gasp in surprise. The fluffy stuffed toy spoke to him, and he recognized the voice, asking if it was the him from the letter and what was with its form. His future self replied that it was a type of space-time magic that had possessed the plushie at his house. He questioned his future self if this explained everything, but his future self only stated that it was an emergency, as the Chaos Dragon had appeared earlier than in the future. He knew if he asked his future self what he meant by Chaos Dragon, his future self explained that the Chaos Dragon was bad news, because it had destroyed the Adventurers Guild in the area, resulting in many casualties. It also caused an unprecedented catastrophe and was a monster, categorized as an alpha-type extermination target. Just as in his future self emphasized that, since it appeared earlier than expected, they had to defeat it no matter what. He told his future self that if they didn't, the catastrophic events would repeat themselves, to which his future self agreed, confirming that it was just as it had been in his future. Shocked by the revelation, he shouted to his future self that if that was the case, they had to contact the Adventurers Guild and request an extermination team, because with a squad of high rankers, even the Chaos Dragon would be more manageable. However, his future self just looked back, stating that they couldn't because time was up. Suddenly he heard something massive approaching from above. When he looked up, he was stunned to see the Chaos Dragon soaring overhead. He asked his future self if the dragon wasn't supposed to be confined to a dungeon, but his future self replied that it was a ferocious migrating species, unlikely to stay in one place. As the dragon flew past them, he cursed in panic, knowing that if it continued on its path, the school would suffer casualties. The students who had been peacefully exiting the school and engaging in light-hearted chatter stopped abruptly as darkness enveloped their surroundings. They looked up in horror at the dragon flying above, frozen in shock and questioning why it was there. The dragon stared down at them and dove toward the ground, prompting them to flee back to the safety of the school. In terror, a lady shouted for everyone to prepare for battle and instructed the 9 mage students to evacuate hastily to the school dorms. Meanwhile, the mages took their positions. He ran after the dragon, shouting back to indicate that the students in front were the student council mage security guards. The students formed a magic circle and aimed it at the dragon hovering above them. They began attacking the dragon with their magical powers, and the lady in front raised her staff, commanding her team not to let the dragon near the school grounds. She then cast a massive magic circle above the dragon and unleashed an attack that resulted in an explosion. Her team proudly thought they had subdued it, and she smiled as they praised her, but her smile turned to shock when she heard the dragon growling in anger. To their dismay, they realized that their attacks had no effect. It was immune to anti-dragon magic bullets. The dragon then gathered power in its mouth and released a devastating blast toward the student council's mages. The attack hit them directly, giving them no time to escape, and caused massive destruction on the ground. In an instant, the student council's mages' security guards were down. His future self commented that this was to be expected, since they were only student mages. He shouted at his future self that now was not the time for such remarks, but his future self simply called his name, and before he could look through something in his head, he asked his future self what he was doing, and the reply came that it was dragon incense, a scent that lures dragons. His future self explained that the dragon, being a ferocious migrating species with low intelligence, would now pursue only him. The dragon then swooped down towards him, ready to attack. But his future self sternly told him that he had to face it and show them the power of a space-time mage. The dragon glared at him in anger, and his future self shouted that it was coming their way, and urged him to run, which he did. Suddenly he heard someone asking if they were okay. Turning in surprise, he saw Shinano helping the students. His future self asked him if he truly wished to keep Shinano out of this ordeal, to which he responded affirmatively. His future self then advised him that the best course of action would be to run, suggesting this would minimize the risk of witnesses to their battle. Using his quick body skill, he sped away with the dragon in hot pursuit. A moment later, he arrived at Tokyo's City JR Nakano Station. His future self informed him that the train yard was currently deserted and instructed him to jump over the fence to lure the Chaos Dragon, which he promptly did. Once they were on the other side and waiting for the dragon, he asked his future self about the dragon's characteristics. His future self explained that the dragon belonged to the dark element, possessed very powerful dragon breath, which meant instant death if confronted head-on, and emitted a miasma that caused a delay effect debuff. Furthermore, it had physical attack resistance, meaning it was impervious to damage from careless attacks. He asked his future self if this meant it was an absolute monster from 5 years in the future, to which his future self confirmed it was true. However, he added that the dragon was still a juvenile with low intelligence, making it susceptible to the dragon incense. He nodded in understanding, but when his future self mentioned that the incense cost 500,000 credits, he was shocked and asked if his future self truly meant 500,000. His future self affirmed the cost and mentioned withdrawing it from his bank account, which made him grab his future self in shock and demand to know how he knew his PIN number. His future self didn't respond, causing him to curse in frustration. His future self reassured him not to worry, promising that he would easily recoup such a minor sum, and that defeating the dragon would bring a substantial reward. Moreover, he emphasized that money was merely the cherry on top. The real prize would be the skill cube dropped by the dragon, which would grant him a new space-time magic spell. His future self then shifted focus back to the task at hand, explaining that the Chaos Dragon had not yet reached its mature form, so its weak point, the dragon core, would be exposed. As his future self was about to reveal the location of the dragon core, the dragon appeared above them. Growling menacingly, it hurled a powerful attack at them, but fortunately they both leapt aside just in time to dodge it. As it gathered power in its mouth once more, he gripped his sword while his future self shouted a warning. He sarcastically thanked his future self for the useless advice and then skillfully dodged the dragon's multiple attacks thanks to his quick body spell. When the barrage of attacks ceased, he paused and informed his future self, who was dodging behind him, that he had managed to evade them somehow. However, he was caught off guard when another attack flew directly at him and struck him, causing him to scream in pain as an explosion erupted from the impact. Peering through the fog, the dragon noticed a blue light emerging. Shocked, the dragon saw him launching toward it, while proclaiming that he was from 0.5 seconds ago. His future self looked on in amazement, wondering if he had just invented a practical application of space-time magic in the heat of the moment. He then leaped toward the dragon's core, and upon seeing it, he was certain it was the target. He swung his sword with all his might at the dragon's core, but felt no connection with his strike, leaving him puzzled. Suddenly, The core unleashed power and the dragon began to vanish before his eyes. He landed remarking to his future self that he had not been warned about this ability, prompting his future self to recall and explain that the Chaos Dragon could transform its entire body into miasma, advising him to be cautious during attacks. He sighed and told his future self that next time he should share such crucial information before a fight. As his future self warned, the dragon could also materialize the miasma to create an army of small, dragon-like figures known as a legion. True to his future self's warning, the Chaos Dragon released these small figures around him, making him question if it was really just juvenile. He then guessed that it couldn't be dealt with by ordinary means. His future self told him that originally this tough enemy wasn't supposed to appear for another 5 years. He asked his future self why such a monster was appearing now, and the reply came that it might be due to him altering the future, so he should take responsibility and defeat the dragon properly. He sighed in frustration and asked if his future self meant that everything was his fault. Suddenly one of the small dragons tried to pin him down, but fortunately he used his quick body spell in time and jumped away. Another small dragon lunged at him and he slashed it in half with his sword. He then saw that it disappeared, which made him feel relief because he proved that these small dragons don't transform into miasma. When he hits them, his future self told him to scatter the small fry and wait for his chance to attack, but he shouted back that he would do just that even without being told. He then powered up his foot and aimed at his target. He jumped up with speed, slashing every little dragon flying in midair, trying to kill them quickly to conserve energy. A moment later, his future self noticed that he had defeated all the small dragons and that his level had increased by 3, but he was exhausted and catching his breath. He asked his future self if the Chaos Dragon had run out of small dragons. Suddenly, the dragon reappeared in front of him and spat out another attack. He was stunned and jumped away just as the attack was about to hit him, then watched it explode, destroying the ground. He narrowly avoided being caught in the blast. The dragon gathered power in its mouth again, and he was shocked to see it attacking once more. He quickly ran from his position to avoid the next attack, noting how the hull melted from the dragon's power. He realized he had struggled with the small fires and had used too much stamina. Now reaching his limits, he knew he had to wait a few more minutes before he could go all out and must somehow strike at its weakness. The dragon core sprinted toward the dragon, but stopped abruptly when he saw it fly higher. His future self, smiling, told him that his attacks wouldn't reach it all the way out there. He growled in frustration, cursing under his breath as he wondered what to do next. Glancing around, he searched for anything that might help. His eyes landed on unused containers and trains, sparking an idea. He thought that if he executed his plan, he might get closer to the dragon. His future self asked what he was planning to do. Noting that the situation was growing more dire by the second, ignoring the caution, he grabbed the plushie and dragged it along. As he ran, he then leaped onto the containers and up to a pole. His future self yelled that even from such a height, he still wouldn't be able to reach the dragon, to which he responded that he knew. He swung the plushie backward to gain momentum, then hurled it hard toward the dragon, jockeying his future self. Next, he cast his stop chain spell on the plush. After that, he leaped towards the plushie and then onto the dragon, causing his future self to shout in shock and disbelief. He yelled at the dragon that he wouldn't let it transform into miasma again and used his stop chain spell to grab the dragon. He knew that such an enemy couldn't be restrained for more than a few seconds, but that was all the time he needed. He thrust his sword towards the dragon's core, struggling because it was extremely hard. He noticed his chain was fading, so he pushed his sword with all his might into the core. As the stop chain shattered, freeing the dragon, he channeled all his magic power into the sword, shattering the dragon's core. It screamed in pain, and fortunately, the core cracked and then exploded, while the plushie fell face first to the ground. A minute later, he emerged from the smoke with a broken sword. But triumphantly, he had managed to defeat the Chaos Dragon on his own. The dead dragon slowly disappeared, and the system displayed that his level had increased by 15, his swordsman's skill by 28, and he had obtained 872,300 credits. He also obtained a material Chaos Dragon 5. The system then advised him to check the upgrading options for Adventurer rank C and recommended visiting the nearest adventure guild. His future self told him that he had done as well as expected. However, he used him as a stepping stone to gain some footing. Angrily, his future self the meaning of this, but he just ignored him while looking at the system. The system then showed that his secret skill, space-time magic, had increased by 20 levels, and his material rewind and quick body skills had increased by 2 levels each. His space-time mage's passive skill had also increased by 2 levels, and he obtained 50 potential unleashing. His future self told him that they had managed to avert a catastrophic event from repeating in the future, so he guessed it was fine and they had achieved what they wanted. Suddenly, his future self heard something approaching and warned him that it seemed like someone had reported the incident, which could be bad for them if discovered. His future self then jumped on his shoulder and told him that they were leaving now. He told his future self that it was rare for them to agree on something. He then jumped inside the fence and rushed to his apartment building. Once inside, he grabbed some food and opened it. Remembering something, he then asked his future self if he needed to eat at all, to which his future self replied that there was no way a plushie would be capable of eating, and told him to try using common sense to figure things out. He retorted that if he used common sense, a plushie that could talk was way crazier. Just as he was about to eat, he remembered something he needed to do that he had almost forgotten, so he stood up and walked to his small desk. He then poured a drink into the cup and placed it in front of their family picture. While telling his mother, father, and little sister, Rhea, that he was home, his future self stared at him in silence. They told him not to poke fun at him for doing it. His future self replied that he wouldn't because after all he was him. His future self then decided to leave out the thing about Rhea for now and continue keeping it a secret because it was still too soon for him to know, and swore that he'd tell him when he grows as a space-time mage. He then tells his future self that he just obtained some weapon material earlier, which is the Chaos Dragon Fang. His future self tells him that his sword is already falling apart and won't withstand another battle, so it's perfect timing. His future self also suggests taking a break from school tomorrow to go do some weapon synthesis. The next day they arrive at the Adventurers Guild Shinjuku Metropolitan Government Office Branch. He tells his future self that he used to think that place had nothing to offer a weak small-time adventurer like him. His future self proudly smiles and tells him that all of it is now possible thanks to him, but he just walks into the building, telling his future self that as soon as they are done with their business there, they are going home and he shouldn't roam anywhere on his own. Inside the reception lobby, he hears an announcement that the person with no 23 should proceed to the reception counter, indicating it was their turn. He approaches the counter and the lady asks him the purpose of his visit today. He replies that he has finished conquering a dungeon and would like her to check his results. He then hands his card to the lady, who, though she initially thinks he looks like just a plain and weak adventurer, takes his card and tells him to let her take a look at his adventurer part. The lady inserts the card into her system. When the system reads the card, a panel appears in front of him. She tells him they need to confirm his identity, so he should place his hand on the panel, and they will be able to check his results afterward. He places his palm on the panel as instructed, and the lady begins to check his results. However, she is shocked to discover that he has ranked up from rank E to rank C in just one day, which seems impossible to her. Stuttering, the lady exclaims that it's so strange and asks if there is a terminal malfunction. When he notices people staring at them because of the lady's action, he realizes that it was bad, and if things continued like this, he would stand out far too much, something he absolutely detested as he hated dealing with troublesome situations. He then used his material rewind on the system and told the lady, who was facing away from him, that the system had finished authenticating his identity. The lady checked the system again and saw that his rank was E, which confused her and prompted her to ask what was going on. He asked the lady if something was wrong, but she stuttered that nothing was amiss and that she would return his card, all the while thinking how strange the situation was. He took his card and thanked the lady. After he left, the system reverted his rank to its original status, which was rank C. His future self commended him for cleverly applying the rewind to the screen, remarking that they needed to prevent their future paths from diverging as much as possible. A few minutes later they arrived in front of the elevator, and he asked his future self if this was their destination. His future self confirmed it was and instructed him to step into the elevator. He did so and waited for the doors to open. When the elevator doors opened, he realized they were on the rank of floor. He told his future self that they couldn't enter unless they were rank A, but his future self simply told him to forget about it, and then transformed into a letter. He looked at the letter, puzzled by the situation, but his future self ordered him to hold it up to the scanner. He reminded his future self that they were in a high security area, but his future self insisted he just follow the instructions. He complied and scanned the letter at the scanner. Then the rank gate opened and he walked inside while his future self told him they should begin synthesizing a weapon suitable for a space-time age, immediately making him smile in excitement. He then asks his future self if there is a field trip planned for today, but he notices a man typing on a computer nearby. His future self responds that there is no field trip. Instead, they are visiting to request the synthesis of a weapon. The man stands up, noticing them, and asks if he is an adventurer with at least a rank of qualification. This man is the Weapon Synthesis Laboratory Chief, Shirayama. Taking Shirayama, eyeing him suspiciously, remarks that he looks more like a rank F student and questions if he tricked security to get in there. His future self whispers for him to show Shirayama that thing. He then presents the Chaos Dragon Fang to Shirayama, explaining that it is a rare material dropped by a formidable enemy. He requests to use it as a synthesis material to enhance a weapon. Shirayama examines the Chaos Dragon Fang closely and acknowledges its quality. Shirayama asks if the material came from something he hunted, to which he replies affirmatively. Shirayama then inspects his sword while nodding in agreement, accessing something on his smartwatch. Shirayama causes a device in the middle of the room to activate. He explains that it is the latest and most advanced synthesis device in Japan, at the cutting edge of otherworld research. He notes that the analytical results for the Chaos Dragon Fang aren't even recorded in the guild's database, so he will use this opportunity for study purposes, and let him use the device for free. Shirayama also tells him to call when he is done. He puts his bag down while his future self mentions that he has never done weapon synthesis before, so he will teach him now. A system interface pops up in front of him, indicating that they are not allowed to take the synthesis course at the academy unless they are ranked B or above. He steps inside the machine as his future self explains that synthesis is divided into 4 steps. First, he must decide which weapon to use as the base for the synthesis. For him, it will be the sword lent by the academy. Second, he should decide on the attribute he wants the weapon to be imbued with. The number of attributes a weapon can have is determined by its rank, and since his sword is a rank F weapon, it is 1 attribute slot. Third, the material he was using to do the enchanting, and types of material belonging to groups, such as mineral materials or maters. Bone materials also exist, and there are cases in which sometimes 2 swords can be combined as well, but in this case his material will be the Chaos Dragon Fang. The last step after deciding all of that, it was finally synthesis time, and how much he decided to spend on the actual forging steps is also a factor, because the strength of the weapon will be determined by all of the above, which he responded that he understood. He then put into the machine his sword to be the base of the synthesis, and the system asked him to choose the elements he wished to imbue, which are fire, water, wind, earth, and light elements. His future self tells him that there's nothing they can do about it, and he should take the light element as his first choice, which he follows the machine on one side then open, making him ask if he was right that he had to put in the strengthening materials. He then put the Chaos Dragon Fang inside, and after that it closed. He was deciding to set the forging time when his future self tell him that they should go with 3 years, making him shocked and shout that he couldn't wait that long, but his future self just tell him to just do as he says, so without any choice he followed and set 3 years. The weapon then begins to synthesize and tell him to look forward to its completion in 3 years' time. Suddenly his future self jumped into the machine, making him shock, and it then headed to the machine's side. Then the machine released a strong surge of power, causing a loud explosion. The machine then thanks him for waiting so long and announces that the weapon synthesis is now complete. It reveals a chaos sword with the light attribute and a rank. His future self reappears in his pocket looking worn out, but affirming that the synthesis is real and completed. He can hardly believe it and asks it if it's truly done, to which his future self confirms, adding that this process can't be done too often. Shirayama is shocked, unable to believe that a 3-year-long forging was completed. In just a few seconds he begins typing on the system. Baffled by what just happened, his future self urges him to hurry up and move, saying it's time for them to go. He sighs, placing the sword in his inventory, and tells his future self he thought he'd never say that. He then thanks Shirayama and tells him he'll be leaving now. Shirayama tries to stop him, but he walks away. Overhearing a conversation about an anonymous rumor, intrigued, he listens to a man telling his friend that they killed a ferocious, migrating species in an instant and wonders what kind of person could do that. The friend speculates that if their identity were known, it would trigger a scouting battle between famous clans, and mentions wanting to be scouted by the rank S adventurer, Lumika clan. The man responds that it will probably never happen in the lifetime of a rank D like him as he passes by. He thinks it's really bad and suggests they should leave immediately. However, his future self, now turned back into the stuffed toy, disagrees and suggests they seize the day and head for a little sword test. He asks his future self where, and it replied that they should go to the place where the sacred beast Cerberus resides. He stops in horror, asking if he just mentioned the sacred beast Cerberus. Just then Shinano appears in front of him, panicking and calling out his name with teary eyes. Shinano tells him that she is so glad he is alive. She explains that they told her the monster that attacked the school was after him. She also mentions that she has been sending him messages for the longest time, but they remain unread and he didn't even attend his school today. She then shouts at him, expressing how worried she is. This makes him stutteringly ask what she was doing there. She retorts that she should be the one asking him that, and explains that she came as a representative to deliver an application for a student-led dungeon raid. He acknowledges her and recalls that she is the top second-year student in the mage program. His future self whispers to him to cut it short without giving out any unnecessary information, to which he replies that he knows. Shinano wipes her tears and tells him again that she is really glad he is okay. He scratches his head and apologizes for making her worry. As she looks up at him after wiping her tears, she notices the stuffed toys behind him and asks about the plush, remarking that it's so cute. She then grabs it out of his backpack, asking to take a closer look. She hugs it and says that it somehow gives off the same scent as him, which puts her at ease. He panics, thinking it's bizarre, but it gives him an idea. He then tells her she can keep it for a while if she likes it so much. Shocking his future self, she replies that she can give it back later. Thanking him, she looks at the stuffed toys while he walks away, telling her not to mention it, thinking he managed to divert her attention somehow. She happily waves goodbye as his future self calls out and shouts at him not to leave him there. The next day, at the Adventure Cultivation Agency High School Division, his future self isn't talking, so he tells it not to be mad, reminding it that he went back to get it right away. His future self angrily shouts that the issue isn't that, but rather that he was able to see the childhood friend he lost 10 years ago once more, all thanks to him, and he expresses his gratitude. He responds that it's good for him without noticing someone filming him from above. The man recognized him as Kazu Haruto, the so-called god of plagues, the mysterious man that looks at him and finds him interesting. Deciding to set him as his next target, he tells him to entertain him and calls him Mr. Mysterious Dragon Slayer. Meanwhile, in the student consulting office, someone slams a hand on the table in anger. The student council vice president, Sakuragi Yuzuki, asks him if you really don't know anything about it. He replies that he doesn't, and Yuzuki explains that the day before yesterday, when the ferocious migrating species attacked after classes, she heard that the direction he ran away was the same as where the monster was heading. He responds that the monster changed targets midway, focused its attention on another student and went somewhere else. He also tells her he was sure it was that guy who defeated it, and it was a very close call for him. She asks if he knows the identity of the student who defeated the monster. He shakes his head and explains that at that moment he was too focused on trying to escape. She sighs and tells him she understands. He walks to the door, saying he'll be taking his leave now because class will start soon. She tells him to wait a second, but he still walks out of the room wondering why he is being suspected. His future self replies that it's probably due to the live video showing him jumping to the dragon and killing it instantly. He asks his future self if they can stop it from being spread using space-time magic or something, but his future self replies that it's impossible. With his current skill, he then sighs and walks into his classroom, surprised when he hears his classmates, but he just walks to his seat. One classmate says that things are finally going to get started. He sits on his chair, thinking that he was already being avoided in class, but today it feels different from how it normally was. Shinano then appears in front of him, shouting that he needs to be careful and get away. Someone tells her that she doesn't need to tell Haruto anything more. The high school division's third-year student and student council president, Sumeragi Ruuba, steps in and tells Shinano that he'll take it from there. He introduces himself as Sumeragi Ruuba, the student council president and the genius magician who reigns supreme at the top of the school hierarchy, meaning he is the school's strongest. Ruka then asks if he is Kazuya Haruto, and he replies yes. Ruba tells him that he came to request a magic duel. His classmates begin to whisper and tease him from behind, thinking that he is finished, but he just stares seriously back at Ruga, who smiles at him. Ruba tells him that a failure like him with zero magic capacity destroyed the device used for measuring the magic capacity of a mage. Traces of an unknown substance were left at the scene, and he also annihilated that ferocious chaos dragon alone. Haruto wonders how Yuba knows about this, but Yuba just tells him that it is very interesting, which is why they should nip it in the bud while it's still in its early stages, making Haruto glare at him in anger. Ruba then declares that the truth will be revealed, adding that he is also someone who has defeated a dragon single-handedly. Therefore, they should decide in a magic duel who deserves the title of Dragon Slayer. Haruto knows that a magic duel is a special form of test sanctioned and facilitated by the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, conducted between students to gauge and assess their actual strengths. The outcomes of these duels determine the ranking of the students within the school. Students at the top of the ranking are granted various privileges within the school, and are considered to be on the path to becoming an Adventurers Guild officer after graduation. The only rule in these duels is not to use any magic or spell that could result in death, permanent injury, or after effects. The participants of a duel are established at the call and discretion of the side with the lower rank, who also has the right to nominate a desired opponent of a higher rank. Naruto also knows that in a duel request, the person with the higher rank must always agree to it, but the person with the lower rank is allowed to refuse. In other words, he thinks that there is no way in hell he'd accept a duel with the one student in the school ranking. Ruva then tells Shinano that she should think more carefully about who she associates with if she aims to become a student council member next term. He looks at her breasts and legs, suggesting they take the chance next time to make her fully aware of this. In a close and personal private lesson, he adds that he'll teach her what it takes to join the student council. Too, she awkwardly agrees and stutteringly thanks Ruba for his guidance in advance. Ruba smiles at the frightened Shinano, making Haruto clench his fist in anger. He stands up and calls out to Ruba, saying he'll accept the duel challenge. Surprising Shinano, Ruba is about to say something, but Haruto adds that he has one condition. Ruba asks what it is. Haruto replies that the loser must drop out of the academy. Ruba smiles, turns around, and replies that he gladly accepts, and now it's too late for Haruto to regret his words. During break time, Haruto is eating when his future self tells him that he had quite a sharp tongue and is becoming more and more like him. His future self warns him that Yuba is strong. Haruto asks if he knows Ruba, to which his future self nods and tells him that Ruba will become the Adventurers Guild Shinjuku branch chief. Ruba will come up with many new spells concerning the fire element and become one of the 7 sages. Haruto scoffs, saying it sounds more like a fool than a sage. His future self agrees, saying Ruba's character and nature are sleazy personified. From that point onwards, Ruba will use his position to exploit countless women under his command, confirming to Haruto that Ruba is a scumbag. His future self continues, explaining that Ruba is also skillful at gathering followers. His certainty about Haruto being the so-called Dragon Slayer probably stems from information provided by students in his faction. Additionally, Ruba's magic talent is outstanding, so his claim of being a genius mage isn't entirely baseless. His future self admits that the current him won't be able to win against Ruba. He suggests they take a look at Haruto's stats. Haruto opens his stats, showing he is level 15. Rank C with the class of swordsman. His skills are swordsmanship level 31 and space-time magic level 34. His power is 61, agility is 159. Defense is 9, magic power is 0. Intelligence is B, mental strength is B, and growth potential is S. The system shows that his learned spells are quick body level 2, stop chain, and material rewind level 2. His future self tells him he has grown quite a lot. He then touches the system, causing it to change, and tells Haruto that compared to Ruba's stats, he has nothing. Haruto is shocked and asks his future self if he can see Ruba's stats. The system showed that Ruba is level 78, Manga with the class mage. His skills include fire magic level 76, water magic level 52, wind magic level 56, and earth magic level 41. His power is 230, agility 475, defense 789, magic power 642, intelligence A, mental strength B, and growth potential B. His future self then tells him that there is a 10-fold difference in strength. Haruto's still processing this information, asks his future self if he can see other stats, and if this is really space-time magic. While wondering if there's truly such a vast difference between them, he then hears a girl crying nearby, saying that she just couldn't do it. She tearfully asks why she suddenly became unable to use magic at all, and expresses her fear of failing the regular examination for the mage's course at this rate. Her friend tells her that there is nothing wrong with how she uses her wand, her chanting, or any part of the process. The girl then asks if she has no other choice but to accept a private lesson from Yuba at his place. Haruto is stunned and falls silent, hearing the girl reluctantly agree, hoping that everything will be over soon. After taking her clothes off and closing her eyes, this reminds him of the scared Shinano. He clenches his fist in anger and approaches the girls, asking if he can have a moment. The 2 girls are surprised and ask who he is and if he is someone from a swordsman's course. He tells them that they don't have to take those private lessons because he'll take care of it one way or another. He then raised his palm a little closer to the lady and began to focus. He realized that in the magic capacity measuring class, he could now understand the movements and inner workings of magic. He saw that the magic circuits inside the lady's body were experiencing a burn in effect, and the traffic through the circuits was clogged due to her chanting spells that far exceeded her capacity. Knowing that in such cases, one just needs to eliminate the disturbances in those sections and restore the flow of magic to normal, he opened his eyes and told the lady not to be alarmed. He got closer to the confused lady, released his power, and hit every circuit in her body, causing her to be momentarily bewildered, while her friend shouted, calling her name in worry. Yuko's friend angrily asked him what he was doing, but he just told Yuko to try using some magic now. Yuko, stuttering, replied okay. While her friend asked if she was alright, Yuko released some of her magic, and was shocked to feel and see that she could use it again. She happily shouted that she could use magic again, and her friend couldn't believe it, noticing that the magic effect was even stronger than before. As he watched her happily playing with her magic, Yuko thanked him profusely, but he simply replied not to mention it. Yuko, with happy tears, told her friend that she wouldn't have to go through that horrible experience with Yuga, to which her friend expressed immense relief and happiness. He then remembered Shinano's afraid face when she was talking with Ruga after school. His future self was staring at him, so he asked what he had to do to get stronger because there were only 3 days left until the duel and he wanted to close the strength gap by then. He then asked his future self to tell him which dungeon would have the most effect on his growth and that he could currently tackle. His future self smiled and said that he had already taken care of the next dungeon's map and information. Naruto asked what the clear rewards were and his future self replied that the rewards were a colossal amount of experience points, new space-time magic spells, a chance to try out his newly synthesized weapon and a beast to summon, making Naruto satisfied because that was exactly what he was talking about. He then entered the Azabu by rank dungeon, Crystal Labyrinth, which is recommended for adventurers level 65 and above. Though satisfied with the challenge, he wondered if he really had to deal with that many enemies as swarms surrounded him. His future self asked what he thought about it, then if it was worth the trouble taking out his chaos sword. He replied yes and thanked him. His future self then told him not to let even one of them get away, which he agreed to, jumping into the fray, while shouting that he would defeat all the monsters roaming in that dungeon 1 hour later. In the Crystal Labyrinth's deepest section, a man slashed at an armored monster, but his sword shattered into pieces. A lady then activated her staff, telling the man to move out of the way, and attack the armored monster with her flame jet magic power. He probably asked the monster if it liked it, but when the smoke from the fire cleared, they were both shocked to see the Dark Crystal Knight still alive. With 23 health, 50 mana, 340 attack, 610 defense and B magic resistance, they hugged each other in horror, realizing their attacks didn't work. When the knight was about to end their life, they closed their eyes, but then something blocked the knight's attack, causing an explosion. When the man opened his eyes, he was shocked to see someone's sword piercing the knight's head and slashing it, causing it to explode into pieces. The lady stutteringly said that they were safe, and the man thanked him. Naruto told them that enemies appeared in great numbers in that dungeon, so it was better for them to leave quickly. The man then worriedly asked what about him and what he was going to do. Naruto replied that in order for them to escape successfully, he would attract the enemy's attention. When the knights were gathered in front of him, he told them to quickly go. The man apologized for leaving and thanked him once again. After they left, his future self told him that counting the ones from just now, he had defeated 89 of them thus far, but he hadn't fulfilled even half of his quota yet. Naruto replied that he was fully aware of it. His future self then told them to finish quickly and level up as soon as possible. He then raised his sword and slashed every monster close to him, while his future self told him that this type of monster gives the most experience points inside the Crystal Labyrinth. Killing them is the most efficient way to level up. However, with his current strength, they were quite fearsome enemies. He immediately looked back and used his stop chain skill to attack every knight trying to ambush him from behind. His future self reminded him that his weapon, the Chaos Sword, had been imbued with the light element, allowing him to fight these monsters on equal footing. Landing in the middle of the group, where other knights were surrounding him, his future self urged him to defeat as many as possible. He activated his quick body skills, disagreed with his future self, and shouted that he wouldn't leave even one of them standing. The knights were pushed back slightly by his power as he blocked every attack they threw at him. Seeing an opportunity, he slashed every knight in front of him. He then paused for a moment to catch his breath, but was shocked when a huge knight charged at him. It was the Dark Crystal General, boasting 48 health, 125 mana, 560 attack, 880 defense, and a magic resistance. His future self explained that it was a boss-type monster's stats. He blocked the general's sword with his own. He tried his best not to be overwhelmed by its sheer power, deciding to use his sword's special properties. Before being overpowered, the sword disappeared, and he managed to jump away in time to dodge the general's attack. The sword then reappeared, allowing him to get behind the general with incredible speed. He swung it forward and cut the general's head with all his might, successfully killing it. Exhausted, his future self called out to him and he shouted back in frustration, asking what it was as he was currently busy dodging attacks from the remaining knights. His future self responded that he probably knew this by now, but he would say it anyway. The core principles and fundamentals of space-time magic are different from regular magic. It doesn't work through magic capacity, but uses a certain factor that governs the flow of time in the world, which is why even someone with zero magic capacity like him can activate it. He shouted at his future self, asking if he was really telling him this right now while he was busy blocking and attacking the knights. His future self calmly replied yes, explaining that extreme conditions during a fight are the most effective way to learn. When he was overwhelmed by the enemy, he activated his stop chain, hitting every knight in front of him. He then swiftly slashed them. He then heard someone approach from behind and his future self warned him not to let his guard down. he saw the dark crystal sorcerers, each with 12 health, 490 mana, 210 attack, 320 defense and a magic resistance. The sorcerer gathered their magic power in their hands. When his future self saw him stunned in shock, he reminded him that he is a space-time mage. He easily dodged their attack, while his future self told him that he should always be aware of the Chronos factor, even during battle. As the attacks closed in on him, his future self shouted for him to cease the flow of time. He did so, causing the attacks to slow down. Despite this, one attack hit and caused an explosion. When the smoke cleared, he emerged and pointed a magic circle at the sorcerers. Raising his other hand, he gathered power and then attacked the sorcerers with a strong burst of magic, wiping them out in an instant. Eden looked at his hand, asking his future self if this was what using the flow of time meant. His future self replied that yes, that is how it works, and thought that Haruto might even be more talented than him because he had released a chrono ray a moment later. After killing a pile of knights and catching his breath, the system continuously popped up, showing him that he had leveled up. Ignoring the notifications, he asked his future self where their next target was. He then entered the crystal labyrinth, their chamber at the deepest level, and saw the dungeon boss, the sacred beast Cerberus, waiting for him inside. Before he entered the boss gate, he felt a strong pain inside his head. His future self explained that it was a negative side effect of using space-time magic, continuously increasing the burden on the brain. His future self then asked if he wanted to go back, but Haruto placed his hands on the gate and replied no, saying that time was running out. He then faced the sacred beast Cerberus. His future self told him that the boss had a sense of integrity and dignity not found in many monsters, and that being said, he shouldn't let his guard down. The sacred beast Cerberus growled loudly and walked closer, while his future self remarked that, if phrased in an old-fashioned way, one could say it was a magic beast with the soul of a samurai. Naruto clenched his teeth as the pain in his head intensified, which his future self noticed. While the sacred beast Cerberus stared at him, his future self handed him a bottle, telling him to drink it because it would make him feel a bit better. Haruto agreed and took the bottle. The Cerberus then sat down, making him wonder if it was waiting for him to recover. Thinking it was a strange dungeon boss, he drank the potion while the Cerberus waited, and his future self pointed out an old wound on its right flank, advising him to aim for it. As the Cerberus's aura of intimidation returned, Haruto wondered if it was truly waiting for him and if he owed a debt of gratitude to a samurai. The beast then continued to approach and tried to attack with its sharp claws. Fortunately, Haruto jumped away in time to dodge it and drew his sword. He searched its body and saw the wound his future self mentioned on its chest, but suddenly, the Cerberus appeared in front of him at incredible speed, shocking him. He managed to block with his sword, and the Cerberus bit down on it. Haruto struggled to hold on as it tried to destroy his sword with its sharp teeth. He then let go of his sword and jumped above the Cerberus, but one of its other heads gathered power in its mouth. His future self shouted that it was a breath weapon and he should dodge it. Haruto turned around in midair while it was gathering power, and when it breathed out at him, he managed to dodge it. Gathering power in his fist, he saw that the wound area was open. Seizing the opportunity, he punched it, making the beast scream in pain. He then jumped away to create distance, and his future self confusively asked him to wait a moment. The Cerberus was shaking its three heads, and his future self asked if he had just healed its old wound with a pressure point treatment. Haruto replied that he had repaid the Cerberus for waiting for him and wanted to fight it fair and square. His future self shouted that he was crazy and warned that he could die, but Haruto insisted that respect should be returned even to a monster. Besides, he added, if he died there, it would be all he ever amounted to. The servitor threw something to him, and his future self was surprised to see it had returned his sword. It seriously stared at him, understanding the situation. But Haruto told it that he wouldn't be needing the sword. He closed his hands into fists and challenged the beast, declaring that this was no leveling session, but a dungeon boss subjugation, a brawl. They faced each other while his future self wondered what the hell was going on between them. Suddenly the Cerberus jumped to attack. Haruto blocked, but it swung its claw and hit him, sending him flying. Before he hit the crystal behind him, he managed to compose himself and jumped back to attack. He punched one of its heads, managing to throw it off balance, but then another head bit his arm. The beast dragged him and slammed him against the crystal. Haruto screamed in pain, and his future self wearily called his name, shouting for him to pull himself together. The Cerberus then gathered power in its three heads simultaneously. Haruto used the flow of time, which helped him slow down the attack. He swore he would put everything he had into it when his skill faded. The Cerberus had gathered his breath weapon and released it in his direction. Still sitting when it came closer, Haruto managed to get away in time and appeared beneath the beast. He launched his fist with all his might, hoping his body could hold on. He continuously punched the Cerberus, giving all the remaining strength he had. But then his arm began to bleed and he felt intense pain. making him stop. He remembered it was from the bite of one of the Cerberus's heads. The beast then launched its sharp claws at him, but he channeled some of his energy into his fist and punched it, managing to hit it in the neck. The Cerberus screamed in pain. Haruto jumped toward it and launched a powerful kick, declaring that this was the end for it. He struck its center head, breaking the ground it was standing on. The Cerberus fell to the ground defeated. Haruto lost his balance and asked if he was always such a muscle brain before collapsing to the ground. The system then showed that he had cleared the Azabu by rank dungeon. Crystal Labyrinth. A moment later he woke up and heard someone asking if he was finally awake. He looked to his side and saw his future self wordly staring at him. He sat up and replied that it seemed he had somehow managed to beat it. The system showed that his level had increased by 20 and he was amazed at how much he had leveled up. He also saw that he had obtained a space-time mage's robe. Asking what it was, his future self replied that it was formal attire and suggested they try it on later. Suddenly something blocked the light in front of him and he was shocked to see the sacred beast Cerberus standing closer to him. He stood up immediately as it walked towards him, but then it wagged its tails like a puppet, stunning him with confusion. He reached out and managed to touch it, patting it, while his future self told him that it seemed to like him quite a bit. Haruto asked if he was right that this was supposed to be the dungeon boss. His future self admitted that he never expected things to go like this, but they got the rewards anyway, so they should just be glad about it. Haruto asked if he meant the equipment, but his future self replied no, explaining the reward was the summoned beast, the sacred beast Cerberus, the best clear reward for the Crystal Labyrinth. However, they hadn't established an official contract yet, and if Haruto fed it his blood, it would become his vassal. Haruto bit his finger to make it bleed and put his blood into the Cerberus's mouth. The Cerberus slowly disappeared while his future self told him that he would be able to summon it whenever he wished. From now on, the system then showed that the sacred beast Cerberus was now his vassal. His future self told him that with this they had achieved what they came there to do. 3 days later, in the Adventure Cultivation Agency High School Division, students were whispering about Haruto, asking if he was for real as he walked by with scratches, a destroyed uniform, and a bandage on his face. Shinano noticed him from behind and worriedly asked where he had been and what he had been doing since she hadn't been able to reach him at all. He simply replied that he had been doing a little special training in preparation for the duel. She asked what he meant by special training and wondered what he could have been doing to get so worn out. He confidently told her that one way or another he was ready, making her wonder if he was the same Haruto she knew while staring at him. They talked without noticing Ruga watching them from a tree. Ruga thought Haruto had run away long ago and smiled in disbelief that he would choose to come there and publicly show how pitiful he was. A moment later they met in the corridor, and Ruga told him that their duel would take place today after classes. Ruga then teasingly asked if he had resolved himself and called him Mr. Mysterious Dragon Slayer. Haruto simply replied yes, and Ruga reminded him that he hadn't forgotten the foolish condition he proposed either. Haruto confirmed that he remembered correctly that the loser would drop out of school. Ruga agreed, but said it was not enough because it was boring, making Haruto ask what he meant. Ruga proudly swung his cape and suggested they add 100 million credits to the bet, roughly 640,000, making Haruto stunned and shocked. The man behind Ruga teasingly asked if he was going to back out now and told him not to ruin everyone else's fun, so he should take on the bet. Haruto's future self, who was inside his bed, realized that Ruga was using the students to provoke Haruto and cut off his retreat, thinking Ruga was as sly as ever. Haruto felt Shinano tightly grip his hand and saw her fear while looking at Ruga, who was smiling, thinking he would take everything Haruto owned and make him his slave. Shinano stutteringly tried to stop him, but Haruto just replied that he understood and was okay with the 100 million credit bet. Ruga turned around smiling and told him he was looking forward to their magic duel after school. Before Ruga left, he told Shinano that she had chosen to cover for the wrong person, so she should be ready for the personal lesson he said he'd give her. She clenched her hand in fear, but Haruto told her not to worry. When she looked at him, he confidently told her that he would definitely win after school. Haruto was walking in the corridor when his future self reminded him that it was time for the duel. He replied that he knew, but then he stopped walking when he saw a group of students gathered in front of him. They told him it was a coincidence and suggested he play with them a little before his duel with Yuba. Another group of students appeared behind him, mentioning a 1 million credit bonus for each of them if they beat him up, calling it big fat bounty. Naruto kept silent, making the students ask what was the matter and if he was scared. They teased him, saying that even crying and begging wouldn't convince them to let him go, but he mumbled that it was a relief, making them look at him in confusion. He then told them he was relieved to know Yuga was still using the same old tricks he had come to expect. He said that Ruga was such trash it was almost refreshingly cliche, but now he could beat Ruga to a pulp with no worries, and they were first in line to get their fair share. The man in front pointed his sword at Haruto, calling him a bastard and shouting at him not to get so cocky. While launching an attack, Haruto simply grabbed the man's face and slammed him onto the floor. Cracking, he then stared at the other students, saying it was a drag and they should come at him all at once. Later in the Adventure Cultivation Agency arena, Ruka arrogantly asked what they meant by calling Haruto a dragon slayer when all Haruto did was brag arrogantly, and now he was a no-show, wasting his time. He asked the referee if he agreed that if Haruto didn't arrive in the next minute, he should take the win by default. The referee replied of course. The other students surrounded Ryuba, saying that Haruto was too much of a fool for trying to go against him and that Haruto had probably just gone home scared. Ruka smiled, thinking that his lackeys had probably worked Haruto over by now. On the other hand, Shinonome was in the audience praying for Haruto. Suddenly a student shouted that Haruto was there. Ruka turned around in shock and disbelief to see him walking onto the stage. Ruka asked what he was doing there, but Haruto simply replied, asking what was so strange when they were supposed to have a duel. Ruka couldn't believe it and thought about his lackey. Unaware that they had all collapsed in the corridor, Haruto then faced Ruka and told him they should get started. He called the referee and told him to give the signal to start, which the referee stutteringly agreed to. The referee introduced Sumeragi Yuga Class 3 student versus Haruto, a Class 12 student. The referee then shouted for the duel to start, making Yuga panic. He didn't know how Haruto did it, but decided he would personally put an end to it right then and there. Ruka shouted that he would go all out from the start and activated his flame magic power, wrapping the stage in flames. Ruka teasingly approached Haruto and asked if he was ready for what was coming. Haruto's future self told him that Yuga would open with the fire spell Hellfire, part a high-level magic spell. Yuga gathered fire in his palm and threw it at Haruto, shouting for him to die, knowing that Yuga hadn't held back at all. Haruto activated his material rewind skill. He noticed that the flame bullets were causing a disturbance in the flow of time as they advanced. He could see the flame bullets' past positions in the disruption, as well as future traces showing where they would be. By keeping a close eye on them, he could dodge them when they got closer. As the fire bullets neared him, he easily dodged them. Ruka was in shock and disbelief, shouting that it was impossible. When Haruto stepped on the floor, it released a flame that startled him, but he jumped away in time to dodge the surge of flame. Ruka shouted in disbelief that Haruto had dodged even his double-hit trap attack. Ruka was then shocked to see Haruto above him casting an attack. Haruto attacked Ruka with his chrono ray, hitting Ruka and slamming him to the floor, shattering it into pieces. The audience couldn't believe what they were witnessing and asked in panic what that technique was and if Haruto had zero magic capacity. Shinano was just glad and shouted that it was amazing, confirming that he was not the same Haruto she knew anymore. He then steps down onto the stage and asks Ruka if he isn't going to go all out from the start. Ruka immediately stands up, enraged by the teasing question. He dashes toward him, shouting in anger not to mess with him. Calmly he waits for Ryuba to approach. His future self observed that the fire Ryuba is releasing, it's the spell Flame Dragon's Ardent Fist, a direct melee attack clad in 3000 degrees Celsius flames. However, the intense heat only affects what Yuba touches. Despite this, he blocks Yuba's fiery fist with his hand, making Yuba smile, thinking he's an idiot for not realizing his spell ignites anything it touches, including him. But then he swiftly kicks one of Ruba's feet, unbalancing him, and slams him down onto the stage while still holding his fist. He then aims his burning fist at Ruba, causing Ruba to panic and sweat in fear. He launches his fist but deliberately misses Ruba's face, hitting the floor. Instead, raising his fist, he tells Ruba that now his flames are out. Ruba stands up and jumps away, shouting that he's a wretched piece of trash who's going to fail anyway. Glancing at his men behind him, Ruba asks if they know what to do, to which they respond by releasing their power. The men channel their magic into Ruba, amplifying his own power. His future self thinks it's a blatant violation of the rules, yet refreshingly bold. He then asks Ruba how much power he needs from others, but Ruba, slowly transforming, only laughs mockingly. Ruba's feet morph into flaming monster feet as he unleashes his ultimate secret technique. A string of bright light and fire wraps around Ruba, and a strong magical flame power spreads across the stage. He is stunned in shock, witnessing Ruba's transformation into a demon flame incarnation. His future self tells him that Ruba is now a giant imbued with the magical power of several dozen students from the mage's course, and that he won't be able to handle it with ordinary methods. He replies that he knows Ruba attacks with a burst of fire breath. Wei jumps away just in time to avoid it. He counters with his chrono ray but is surprised to see it has no effect. Ruka then releases flame claws and attempts to grab him, but he narrowly dodges the flaming claws. In his desperate attempt to evade, he hits the wall, realizing he has nowhere left to run. Panic sets in as the flames surround him and Ruba advances closer. He activates his flow of time skill and notices something strange within the flow, like a tear in time itself. He sees a gap inside Ruba's demon form. He thinks that if he can rip it wider he could destroy it. However, before he can act, Ruga launches his huge palm to squeeze him. As Ruga believes he has won, he slashes the demon's hand, causing it to shatter into pieces. He then jumps out and shouts to his future self to let him use the plushie again. His future self, though furious, changes into the teddy bear, saying there's no way around it. He grabs the plushie and throws it using his stop chain skill, activating his quick body skill. He jumps at the plushie in the middle of the chains, using the force to leap high to the top of Ruga. Once at the top, he uses his flow of time skill again. Seeing the tear in the flow of time, he raises his sword and slashes the gap in the demon's body, tearing it in half and revealing Ruba inside. Controlling it, Ruba panics and shouts in shock, demanding to know what is happening. He looks at him, exclaiming that it is absolutely impossible, because as long as the chanting continues, the magic will regenerate the giant indefinitely. Ruba, hiding behind him, asks why it is regenerating and grabs his collar, shouting that there is no such principle in magic that he knows of. In response, he punches Ruba in the stomach, causing him to pass out on the floor. He then looks at the host and asks what's next. The host, stuttering, announces that the winner is Kaju Haruto. Later, Rin and her friends gathered around a table full of food. Rin then shouted to everyone that they should all say it together now, and they all congratulated him on his big victory in the magic duel. Surprised, he shyly thanked them. Rin raised her glass and told him to do the honors. He shyly raised his glass and stutteringly told everyone to cheer, to which the girls happily responded with cheers. They then began to clink their drinks together, and one of the girls sighed, expressing relief and happiness that Yuuga would be dropping out of school. Another girl commented that Yuuga treated the school as his personal property and that he was too much. The girls also mentioned that Ruga tried to solve everything with money and even committed sexual harassment. One of the girls then told Rin that, given a little more time, Ruga could have had her in his clutches, to which she stutteringly replied yes. The girl with purple hair then asked him what happened to the 100 million credits that were at stake in the match. He replied that he had completely forgotten about that bet. Shocking everyone, they asked him why and told him it was a waste. He replied that he was never after the money, making the girls think he was so cool. Akin then called him and asked what his relationship with Rin was, confusing him and causing Rin to spit out her juice in shock. Rin asked Akin what she was even saying. All of a sudden, Akin replied that she meant Haruto picked the fight with the top-ranked student in the school and asked him what the meaning of that was and what their relationship was. He panicked and couldn't answer. Just as he was about to reply, the girl stared at him in excitement, but he simply said that he needed to use the bathroom. He stood up and walked out of the room, making Akin tell everyone that he got away. The girl with purple hair told everyone that she sensed Haruto had somehow changed and asked if they felt it too. The girl with black hair replied yes, saying she felt like Haruto was more put together or mature, especially since not long ago Haruto was almost invisible and had a terrible nickname. But now everything had changed. Rin then thought that ever since that day, Haruto had always been there to help and protect her, and she was sure it would always be that way. She blushed, thinking that they even shared a secret only between the two of them. Meanwhile, Haruto was in the bathroom washing his hands when he received a message on his phone. He read Rin's message apologizing because her friends had gone overboard with their questions and telling him not to overthink it. He smiles upon reading it and thinks that he hasn't seen things so lively in a long time. He clenched his hand, recalling the days when he thought such happiness would never come again. Memories of his parents and little sister eating with him flood his mind, making him realize that the future can change suddenly. He is surprised when his future self, still inside the plushie, calls him and appears behind him. He asks it what's going on and tells it that they'll be going home in a bit, so it should stay quiet until then, but his future self tells him that it's an emergency and a time has finally come, which confuses him. He asks what his future self is talking about. His future self replies that it's time to reveal the reason he is there, and that his younger sister, who is supposed to be dead, is alive. This confuses him even more, and he explains that Rhea passed away in an accident long ago, but his future self insists that it was not in the world he is in and that he should get ready immediately because they'll go save Rhea. He then remembers Rhea excitedly telling him to look at her and showing him the red scarf. He told her that it looked really warm and asked if she made it herself, to which she probably replied yes, that she made it all by herself. He responded that he got it, which made her laugh. She gave the scarf to him, telling him that it was for him. He felt confused and wondered if it would look good on him. She sadly asked if he didn't want it, even though she worked so hard to make it. He quickly reassured her that it wasn't that, and of course he wanted it. Her face lit up with a smile, and she excitedly put the scarf around his neck, telling him he should have just kept quiet and taken it. As he looked at the scarf, Rhea mentioned that the stitching was a little loose. When she finished putting it on him, she told him that tomorrow was Christmas, and it was a present from Ryan to Klaus. He replied that he understood and thanked her for it. She then sat next to him, saying they should have a one-day late Christmas party when she got home from her ballet recital, and that it was a promise. She also told him she would give him another present then too. Unfortunately, he was unable to fulfill that promise. The next morning the plane with Rhea and his parents on board crashed, and they never returned home. He snapped back to reality when he heard his future self calling his name, asking if he was listening. He stayed silent for a moment, looking at the cabinet in front of him with a picture of their family stood next to the red scarf Rhea had given him. He then apologized to his future self for zoning out and asked him to repeat what he had said. His future self told him that he had to pull himself together because he was about to tackle a quest he absolutely couldn't fail. He replied yes and asked his future self why Rhea, his little sister, was alive in the first place when all the passengers died in that plane crash. There was no way Rhea could be alive. His future self asked him what he had heard about the crash. Confused, he replied that he only heard it was due to a mysterious mid-air breakup that occurred at high altitude. His future self explained that it must have looked like that to them, as the mystery was beyond their current science. This puzzled him, and then he asked his future self what he meant. His future self replied that on that day, a space-time hole happened to open in the sky. It was a hole that connected their world to another dimension. Even in the future, it's impossible to predict where one will appear. That hole started warping gravity when it appeared, and unfortunately, the plane his family was on flew close to it. The plane became impossible to control due to the gravitational field caused by the hole and crashed shortly after. He couldn't believe it and told his future self that even so it didn't change the fact that all passengers died in the crash. His future self replied that while no one survived the crash, his sister's body was never found. In other words, his sister was sucked into the space-time hole alone, which stunned him. His future self then explained that the place the hole leads to is called the dimensional gap. Neither the flow of time nor the very definition of space are the same as in their world. Even if many years have passed in their world, for Rhea it would be less than the blink of an eye. When the space-time hole opens, again his sister will return to their world. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Yet his future self explained that this was why he had come to train and guide him. He told him that in the future, by the time he discovered the point where the other dimension crossed, it was already too late, so it must be him, the one in this world, to save Rhea. His future self then begged him to save Rhea, which surprised him. He stood up and replied that he understood and asked where the space-time hole would appear. His future self replied that it would appear far above Tokyo Tower, above the top floor of the Sky Castle dungeon. The next day he was on a rooftop near Tokyo Tower. His future self commented that he never thought he'd buy up all the offensive items and recovery potions they had at the adventurer's shop. He replied that it was all thanks to the ridiculous amount of money he earned from leveling up in Azabu's crystal labyrinth. His future self noted that he was wearing a scarf in the middle of June, to which he replied that he was sensitive to the cold, and his future self decided not to push the matter. His future self then explained that the gate to the Sky Castle dungeon is on Tokyo Tower's observation deck. In 24 hours the space-time hole would open in midair 300 meters above the Sky Castle dungeon's top floor and eject his sister, but if he doesn't make it in time his sister will fall to her death. He replied that he knew, while clenching his fist and pulling out the space-time mage rope from his inventory. He then wore it and swore to his future self that he would definitely save Rhea. He heads to Tokyo Tower, where the guards shouted him to halt, telling him that a dungeon gate has appeared on the observation deck and only adventurers holding a license higher than a rank can enter. Ignoring them he walks away, prompting his future self to ask what he plans to do now. He replies that there is no time, so they should take this shortcut. Activating his quick body skill, he leaps up the metal tower, climbing higher and higher. Clinging to the tower, his future self remarks that he's starting to learn his methods, to which he replies that he's being annoying. He jumps to the side of the observation deck and peeks inside, spotting soldiers with an adventurer named Kirigan. His future self warns him that Kirigan is a troublesome guy. He asks his future self if he knows that man, and his future self replies that Kirigan should be the chief of the Adventurer Guild's Minato branch. Around that time Kirigan is known to be stubborn, overly serious and earnest to a fault. His future self also explained that Kirigan will just check around outside the gate and wait to see if anything happens. But they can't wait for that, so they should hurry through the gate. He draws his sword, causing a crash sound that surprises Kirigan and the soldiers. Tuagan orders a soldier to check the noise, and when the soldier inspects the area, everything looks fine as there is no broken windows. Suddenly he appears behind the soldier and strikes the nape of his neck with his palm, making the soldier collapse instantly. Using material ruin, he restores the window he broke to enter the observation deck, ensuring the soldier saw nothing amiss. Moments later, the soldier rushes back to report to Kirigai that they have a problem. Kirigan asks what it is and the soldier explains that he encountered an intruder who was too strong to handle. Shocking Kirigan declares that he will deal with it personally and tells his soldier to come with him as Kirigan and the soldiers move out. The reporting soldier stays behind. Once they are gone, the soldier removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Haruto. His future self congratulates him on the successful strategy. Haruto then walks towards the dungeon entrance, telling his future self that they should go. His future self agrees and they both enter the dungeon. Once inside, he was shocked to see that the world was upside down. He realized that going down the stairs in the sky castle dungeon meant they were actually rising, and understood why it was still called a dungeon despite being in the sky. His future self explained that the dungeon's theme was the occult and warned him that undead and ghostly monsters would be attacking him. He remarked that it was ironic to face an army of the dead in the middle of a clear blue sky, and that the setting didn't suit his fighting style as a swordsman. His future self reminded him that this had been accounted for, asking him to recall the element they had imbued his sword with during synthesis. He was surprised when he remembered it was the light attribute. His future self asked if he hadn't mentioned it earlier and explained that this was the main reason he had been coaching him. His future self urged him to keep going. He rushed to the door, but stopped in shock when someone appeared in front of him. He swung his sword, slashing the unknown being, and continued toward the door. His future self informed him that in the future he came for. The dungeon had disappeared soon after it was discovered, so nobody had actually set foot in it. However, he had some information on it while Haruto was busy killing monsters. Along the way, his future self explained that the Sky Castle consisted of a total of 100 floors, with a powerful, unavoidable boss guarding every 20th floor. Haruto realized it meant there were 5 bosses. Checking his phone for the time, he saw that he only had 20 hours left, which meant he couldn't waste time on small fries. Suddenly, he stopped in shock as he saw monsters emerging from the floor, a swarm of thousands of monsters rushing to attack him. Frustrated and pissed, he prepared for battle, as the monsters surrounded him, leaving him nowhere to run. He called out Cerberus. The sacred beast Cerberus appeared, killing the monsters near him. He told Cerberus there was no time to lose and that they needed to run through the monsters as fast as possible. In the Sky Castle dungeon's 5th floor, monsters charged at them, but they rode Cerberus, bypassing and killing the monsters. Along the way, he noticed the speed of their progress, and his future self explained that, as its full name suggests, Cerberus is a sacred beast, meaning its attacks are inherently imbued with the holy attribute. He told Cerberus to keep charging through at great speed. They reached the 6th floor, then the 7th, 8th, 9th, and so on, until they arrived at the 20th floor where the first boss resided. Cerberus stopped running, surprising him. He asked what was wrong, but then he heard a noise above them. Looking up, he saw a smoke portal appearing. He jumped off Cerberus, as his future self informed him that this was the first of the bosses that appear every 20 floors, and that he must be victorious to unlock the stairs to the next level. Horses emerged from the portal, followed by a carriage they were dragging. He saw someone controlling the horses and the carriage as it flew down from above. It landed on the floor, and 3 people with dark auras stepped out of the carriage. He recognized them as the fallen noble family's son, lady, and master. They gracefully bowed to him while he noted that they were rank undead monsters. He decided not to worry, knowing that if he couldn't defeat them, he wouldn't be able to save his sister. His future self shouted that they were coming, and he saw the 3 nobles dash toward him to attack. He told his future self to get back, prompting his future self to ask if he was going to use the item he bought at the guild shop. He replied yes, and his future self immediately jumped off his shoulder. He activated his Eye of Time, allowing him to see the flow of time and predict what was to come. He took out the Orichalcum knives and threw them at the noble son. The noble son didn't even flinch and attacked with his sword, but he ducked just in time to avoid it. He then rushed toward the noble lady, attacking her with the knives he controlled. She tried to grab him, but he managed to slash her immediately. He looked back and threw one of the knives at the noble monster coming out behind him. He managed to pierce the knives into the noble master's chest. As the noble master's spear headed toward him, he covered himself and got hit by it, but he managed to put his hand on the floor and stop himself from being pushed further. He was glad that he had set things up perfectly and could distance himself from them just fine. He then raised his hand in front of the 3 nobles and clenched it to detonate. The knives embedded in the fallen nobles released a bright light and exploded, taking the fallen nobles with them. His future self reminded him that each Orichalcum blade, made of the rarest and hardest metals from any dungeon, was an ultra-luxury item worth 100,000 credits each and became explosive when an electric current passed through them. He remarked that he was tossing them around without a second thought. His future self then asked if it was cheap to win by throwing a few million credits at the problem, but he replied that it wasn't over yet because he had only destroyed their physical bodies. Now they had come back as ghosts to attack him as he suspected. It was difficult to damage ghost-type monsters with physical attacks, but he knew it also exposed their vulnerability. He drew his sword imbued with the light attribute, jumped and launched his sword at the fallen noble ghosts. Using his Chaos Meteor skill, he slashed them multiple times with incredible speed, making them disintegrate into ash. The system notified him that the fallen noble family had been defeated. His level increased by 5, his swordsman skill increased by 8, and he had obtained 2,283,210 credits. The stairs to the next floor opened, and he walked closer, telling Rhea to wait for him because her big brother was coming to her rescue. Hours later, on the 40th floor of the Sky Castle dungeon, where the second boss resided, Cerberus opened his mouth wide and bit the boss's neck, killing the undead Queen Lamia. After Cerberus defeated Lamia, it walked closer to him. When he petted it, Cerberus wagged its tails like a happy dog. He praised it for doing a great job, and his future self commented that Cerberus was more of a pet than a sacred beast. With Lamia defeated, only 3 more bosses remained. Later, on the 50th floor, his future self shouted to stop, and Cerberus halted. He asked his future self what was wrong and why they should stop there. His future self told him that there was no mistake and that he should activate the Eye of Time and take a look at the wall. Following the instruction, he was surprised to see a hidden room behind the wall. His future self jumped off his shoulder, explaining that in his own timeline, the dungeon had disappeared before anyone set foot in it, but this time it looked like it would be conquered at last. His future self then changed into the envelope and told him to insert him into a gap in the wall just like before. He then placed the envelope in the gap in the wall, just as his future self ordered him to. The wall split in half while he ordered Cerberus to wait outside, and it said in response. Inside, they saw a huge crystal in the middle of the hidden room. He asked his future self if this wasn't another trick like before, but his future self assured him that he wouldn't do that now. The system showed that the crystal in front of him was called the Akashic Crystal, which could unlock hidden or untapped skills of the person who came into contact with it. He touched the Akashic Crystal and it shattered into pieces. He then saw that he had gained space-time magic, obtained Gravity Bomb and Avatar Replay, and his quick body level increased to 3 and stop chain level to 2. Additionally, he had obtained level 3 potential unleashing with a plus 75 increase. His future self told him that he now had Avatar Replay, and he asked what it did, but his future self suggested trying in real combat. He replied that he thought he'd say that. Hours later, they arrived at the 60th floor to face the third boss, Zombie Beelzebub, known as the Lord of the Flies. He asked what its weak point was, and his future self explained that it was a flying monster that spits a melting solution, has regeneration capabilities, and it stinks. He asked his future self if he was just listing its characteristics, but then he was surprised when Beelzebub appeared in front of him launching an attack. Realizing its speed, he felt the sharp stab of its strong nose and it thought it had killed him, but then he vanished, which shocked it. Beelzebub looked back when his future self asked if he got to use it in actual combat after all. He then rushed to attack Beelzebub from behind. He used his space-time magic Avatar Replay and threw the plush away while activating quick body level 3. Just as Beelzebub was about to pierce him again, he speedily ran to dodge and he channeled his speed into his feet and ran around Beelzebub at high velocity. His future self explained that the space-time magic Avatar Replay creates a clone of his past self to temporarily take his place, confusing the enemy into thinking he was multiplying. He drew his sword and advanced towards Beelzebub. Thanks to Avatar Replay, it looked like a swarm of him was launching an attack. He activated his Chaos Meteor sword skill and got closer, but Beelzebub spat out poison. The poison seemed to hit him, but Beelzebub was surprised when he pierced through the poison and slashed Beelzebub into pieces, killing it with multiple attacks to prevent its regeneration. Beelzebub was successfully killed and it slowly disappears. His future self then joked that he could call himself a ninja master now. He replied, telling his future self to stop it because it would be out of character for him. As the stairs to the next floor opened, he told his future self that only 2 bosses remain. He walked closer to the stairs to continue, but suddenly felt intense pain in his head. He kneeled on the floor and collapsed, causing his future self to call his name and panic. 3 years. But he was deep in thought while Rhea begged him and acted cute. Despite her pleas, he remained silent, still pondering. She assured him that she would do her best and not quit halfway. Begging him to agree, he sighed in defeat and asked if she really wanted to take ballet lessons, to which she excitedly replied yes. He agreed and told her to pick the ballet shoes she liked the most and show them to him later, making her really happy. She then began to hum as she looked through a brochure of ballet shoes, and he smiled while watching his happy little sister. The next day at the ballet school, the students were stretching and chatting when Rhea appeared. She thanked them for waiting for her and told them she was ready. The girls told Rhea they were glad they could do this together and that they should all do their best. Rhea looked back and happily waved at him and he waved back. One of Rhea's friends then teased her, saying she had such a brother complex, and that they could feel the smell of spring in the air. They asked if it wasn't nice having her brother chaperone her around. Which shocked her. She asked them what they were imagining. They then began their ballet lesson while he watched from behind. Rhea followed the person in front of her, spreading her arms, lifting one of her feet, standing on her toe and turning around happily. He smiled because she looked like she was having so much fun. After the ballet lesson, Rhea waved goodbye to her friends and they walked home together. Rhea told him that ballet was really fun and difficult, but she was determined to do her best. He replied that he understood and that it was good. Rhea then looked at him and stopped calling his name. He looked at her confused. As she asked if the shoes and lessons were expensive, he replied that it wasn't expensive at all and she shouldn't worry about it. She mentioned that since their parents had gone overseas to give a presentation at an academic conference, she knew that it must have come from his own money. This surprised him, realizing she had figured it out. He told her it was really fine and she shouldn't worry about it. He asked if she was having fun earlier, and when she nodded, he said he was glad she found something she liked doing because that was always what he had wanted for her. Touched, she held her lunch box and warmly thanked him, which made him happier. She then grabbed his arm and told him she loved him. He told her that pulling him like that was dangerous, but she replied that it wasn't and that they would always be like this. She also told him that she had decided to put all her effort into cooking a meal to show him how much she loved him. He woke up and found himself lying on Cerberus. His future self, worried, told him that he was finally awake. He asked if he had passed out, and his future self replied yes, explaining that he had used too much stamina. He mentioned that if he used the highest grade potion he bought at the Dild shop, he would be fine, but his future self said he had already taken care of it while his physical wounds were healed. The potion wouldn't reverse his mental fatigue. Panicking, he asked about the time limit. His future self informed him that there were only 5 hours left. He stood up determined and said they should go, promising Rhea that they would attend her ballet lessons together again. His future self just stared at him as he walked toward the stairs to the next floor. His future self knew that only one of the 5 intermediate bosses remained, and after defeating it, the final dungeon boss would be next. However, at this rate, Naruto probably wouldn't be able to last much longer. He realized he had no choice but to use his last resort. A moment later, they arrived at the 80th floor and faced the 4th boss, Acid King Mummy, using his space-time magic gravity beam. He easily defeated the Acid King Mummy, causing it to slam down to the floor. As a result, he gained 2 level increases. His swordsman's skill increased by 4 and he obtained 3,561,110 credits. Exhausted, he caught his breath, and Cerberus appeared behind him to cheer him up, prompting him to thank it. The system then asked if he wanted to use an elixir, to which he replied yes. His health was restored, but he still felt pain in his head due to fatigue. His future self asked if he wanted to rest, but he replied no, knowing there was not much time left. Only 3 hours before his sister would come out of the space-time hole. He moved closer to the next floor stairs, telling them they should head to the top floor. Eventually they reached the Sky Castle Dungeon's 100th floor. He told his future self that they had reached space at last, and his future self informed him it was time to face the dungeon boss. His future self explained that after defeating the boss, he would arrive at the precise spot where the space-time hole would appear. He clenched his hand and told his future self that they should go. He entered the room of the last boss and saw the god of the underworld, Soul Reaper, sitting on its chair. The Soul Reaper stared at them with its red eyes, and his future self noted that the monster before them didn't exist in the database of the world he came from. The Soul Reaper stood up, remarking that he was human and just a single one, surprising him as he realized it was a highly intelligent life form capable of understanding language. The Soul Reaper praised him, saying that for someone of the lowly human race whose members can't do better than to flock together and gang up on enemies, to have come this far by himself was commendable, if only just for that. The Soul Reaper then grabbed its scythe and he drew his sword as well. They faced each other. The Soul Reaper introduced itself as the god of the underworld and told him they should begin, promising to bestow upon him the deadliest curse there was. His future self jumped off his shoulder and informed him that the Soul Reaper's weapon was actually in the database. It was called the Curse Commanding Divine Scythe, casting staff for high-level illusion magic, imbued with permanent psychic status of normality's debuff effects. It was an extremely dangerous weapon, but he replied that he didn't care and would beat it right away. Activating his flow of time, he saw the Soul Reaper's weakness. He then activated Quick Body level 3 and jumped toward the Soul Reaper to attack, surprising it with his speed. The Soul Reaper lifted its scythe and swung it at him, but he dodged and jumped in the air to avoid the attack. As it swung the scythe around again, he pulled out a knife and aimed at the Soul Reaper's weakness, throwing it, but the Soul Reaper blocked it with the scythe. It then jumped and appeared in front of him at incredible speed, swinging its scythe. It hit him, but it was just a copy, which the Soul Reaper realized too late. He appeared behind it and used his stop chains skill to chains grab the Soul Reaper, and as he got closer to attack the trapped enemy, the Soul Reaper warned that a curse of that type wouldn't work on a god. He watched in shock as the chains dissolved. Easily freed, the Soul Reaper swung its sight at him with incredible speed, the blade nearing his neck. His future self called his name in panic and worry. Fortunately, he leaned his head and body down just in time to dodge it. He placed his hand on the floor to regain balance and jumped away to create distance between them. The Soul Reaper remarked that he seemed confident in his speed, having dodged the godly side twice. However, it taunted him, saying he was still an inferior life form without wings, bound to crawl on the ground. The Soul Reaper told him that it'll hinder his legs first and then used his cursed dimension, making him feel a strong aura as the floor beneath him flipped upside down. Seeing the Soul Reaper now upside down, he shouted, asking if he was upside down again. It just smiled teasingly, and then the ground began to collapse. He started to fall, realizing the severity of the situation. It had taken significant effort to reach the 100th floor, and now he was descending. The Soul Reaper swung its cursed side at him, telling him he wouldn't be able to move around restlessly like it. Panicking, he quickly pulled out a knife and threw it, thinking that sometimes one must break some eggs to make an omelet. He commanded the knife to explode, and the impact caused the side to miss him, though the explosion force slammed him against a wall. Realizing there was a wall, he stabbed his sword into it and held on tightly to avoid falling further. The Soul Reaper was amazed but continued to taunt him. He deduced that the entire phenomenon of falling was likely the illusion magic the Soul Reaper specialized in, and that he might have fallen under its spell. When he stared into the Soul Reaper's eyes, he wondered how to undo the spell. Once again he looked at the Soul Reaper and was surprised to see it close to him. It opened its mouth and spat out an attack. He jumped away in time, but one of his legs was hit and the curse spread quickly. The Soul Reaper told him that he would be the latest subject for its magic testing, and the grudge of dead humans would eat away at his body. He taunted further, wondering whether his own kind's hatred or the underworld side would kill him first. He saw the smoke reaching his body and knew he had to escape the dimensional space. Quickly, desperately, he searched for a way to do just that. The Soul Reaper raised its scythe and teasingly said its farewell to him. It swung its scythe and he clenched his teeth in panic, wondering if this was supposed to be the end for him in a place like this. At that moment he heard Rhea calling him, and he closed his eyes as the Soul Reaper's scythe descended. Suddenly someone used stop chain level 78 to halt the Soul Reaper. Surprising him, he looked at his future self and called out in astonishment, but his future self told him that this was his last resort. The plushie released a strong light as if it was going to explode. He saw his future self slowly changing, but the bright light was too intense, so he covered his eyes. He then heard an explosion and was stunned when he saw someone appear out of nowhere. His future self in his true form. His future self told him that it would be troublesome to have him die there. His future self then activated his all things rewind skill, and he was shocked to see time flowing backward. He floated upward as his sword, which had been embedded in the stone, was pulled back as he ascended to the ruined ground. You witnessed the shattered earth reconstructing itself piece by piece, until it was completely restored. The Soul Reaper stared at him in silence for a moment, shocked to see him unscathed. It then asked him if he had just undone a spell cast by a god. His future self landed in front of him, surprising him, but his future self simply remarked that it had been a while since he last looked like this. The Soul Reaper shouted, demanding to know what he hoped to achieve by adding just one lowly human to his ranks, declaring that the opening act of the battle was over. The Soul Reaper then unleashed a powerful surge of energy, proclaiming that it was the culmination of its magical research. A swarm of hands and heads emerged from the dark magic, and it summoned an army of demon angels, while declaring that the god of the underworld would deliver divine judgment upon the sinful humans. However, his future self calmly commented that the creature even had the ability to produce or rank monsters. He then ordered his past self to stand up, saying he would take care of the smaller foes so that he could focus on defeating the Soul Reaper. Despite his confusion, he hesitated to object, noting that the Soul Reaper was a god-ranked monster of overwhelming strength. His future self reassured him, explaining that with his newfound comprehension and control over space-time magic, victory was assured because after all they were the same person. With renewed determination, he stood up and moved to stand beside his future self, affirming his understanding. His future self then stated it was time to proceed and whispered the plan to him, which left him surprised. The Soul Reaper, noticing this, raised its hand and commanded the monsters to tear them apart, leaving not a single piece behind. The smaller creatures obeyed, instantly charging at them with their size. Both of them leaped in different directions at top speed, but the demons chasing after his future self when the distance was right. His future self turned and used his gravity territory skill to block the monsters. As the creatures rushed towards him, his future self unleashed a swarm of circular space magic, instantly dissolving them. He shouted at the monster, taunting them to come at him as their opponent. Meanwhile, Haruto rushed towards the Soul Reaper with a few smaller monsters in pursuit, but his future self dissolved them before they could reach him. His future self then used a sped-up field skill, increasing Haruto's speed and helping him get closer to the Soul Reaper. The Soul Reaper called him a disgusting inferior life form, but Haruto simply retorted die. The Soul Reaper then used his Cursed Dimension skill to stop him, but Haruto continued flying forward, shouting that he had already seen that technique before. He shattered the Cursed Dimension with ease, shocking the Soul Reaper. As he drew closer, the creature, now furious, called him an impudent, thusser being, and released a cloud of smoke at him. Realizing that indirect attacks would be a waste of time, Haruto decided to take the shortest route to strike. He swung his sword to counter its side attack, aiming for the creature's heart, knowing it was his weakness. They clashed in a fierce exchange of slashes and counterattacks, until Haruto used his Chaos Meteor skill, managing to pierce the Soul Reaper's side. The creature screamed in pain and angrily warned him not to get carried away. It then used its Curse Edge skill, releasing 3 side slashes simultaneously, catching him off guard. Haruto was struck bleeding and coughing up blood. He quickly activated his Avatar Replay skill, creating a clone from the past to share and mitigate the damage. Despite the pain, he dashed forward again, surprising the Soul Reaper. Pouring all his remaining strength into the attack, he managed to stab the creature's heart with his sword. The Soul Reaper screamed in pain, making Haruto think he had succeeded, but then it smiled at him, sending a shock through his system. He noticed that it had no heart, and before he could react, it slashed him in half. His future self called out to him in worry. The Soul Reaper laughed, asking if they really thought its weak point was its heart. It taunted them, revealing that one of the gods of the underworld's special traits is weak point counterfeiting, a trick to deceive them. Damn humans, it sneered. Haruto's body fell to the ground, split in half, and the Soul Reaper laughed loudly, ordering its little monsters to advance. It taunted his future self, saying he's the only one left now. Haruto's future self, stuttering in disbelief, exclaimed that it was impossible, and loudly wondered what its weak point could be. The Soul Reaper shouted that a god doesn't have any weak points, and if it did, it would be something like the very concept behind its existence, the Forbidden Crown of Hades. It then commanded its monsters to attack Haruto's future self, declaring that it would not entertain any begging for mercy. But Haruto's future self remained calm, and asks if he had heard it, and tells him now they know. Suddenly Haruto appeared behind the Soul Reaper, his sword aimed at its head. He replies that he got it. The Soul Reaper, confused, shouted that it was impossible. Just moments ago it had cut him in half. Haruto explained that the one it had just cut was a replica. When the Soul Reaper slashed his torso, he had used Avatar Replay to split a double and send it charging forward, while the real Haruto had lain on the floor the entire time. Still baffled, the Soul Reaper shouted that Haruto should have died after taking a direct hit from its divine sword. Haruto acknowledged that it was indeed a fatal wound. However, his future self had cast the space-time skill rollback on him beforehand. Just before Haruto died, time rewound on him. His future self added that the skill was extremely complicated and couldn't be used twice on the same target, but fortunately, their plan worked perfectly. The Soul Reaper attempted to grab Haruto, but his future self used Stop Chain level 78 to bind it. He asked Haruto if shall they set the stage for the final act. Haruto then addressed the Soul Reaper, confirming that it had mentioned its weak point was the crown above its head. His future self joined in, saying that they would completely and totally reduce it, and that eerie head of its to smithereens. Haruto exhaled deeply, remembering his little sister thanking him for everything, and telling him she loved him. This memory boosted his power, and with his resolve strengthened, he unleashed his full strength. In one powerful swing he decapitated the Soul Reaper. He then jumped and, moving at incredible speed, slashed its head into small pieces. The Soul Reaper's head disappeared, and its body collapsed to the ground. Defeated with its demise, the little monsters also vanished. Haruto landed back on the ground as the system displayed a message: "You have defeated the god of the underworld, Soul Reaper. Gain 120,000 experience points and 35 million credits." He then reported to his future self that the extermination was complete. Just then a staircase appeared leading to the top floor. His future self told him that it was time to go at last, and Haruto agreed, walking closer to him. Haruto then looked at his older self and, with a hint of worry, asked if that's how he'd look when he grew older. His future self replied jokingly, "I'll hate you." Haruto clarified that he meant it would have been better if his future self had shown up to help from the start. As they began ascending the stairs, his future self reminded him that it was supposed to be a last resort, and there was more to it than met the eye. He then cut the conversation short, saying there wasn't much time left before the space-time hole opened, grabbing his hand tightly, and tells him seriously they should hurry. They then entered the top floor of the Sky Castle dungeon. Surrounded by a thick fog, his future self quickly looked up and shouted to Haruto that it was there. Both of them stared as the sky began to crack open. Exploding with energy in the center of the chaos floated a little girl. It was their little sister Ria's future self. Then told them that the hole would be linked to that world for another 9 minutes and 48 seconds, so they should take their time and not rush things. Floating toward the hole, his future self suddenly remembered something and activated the sped-up field skill, creating circles of energy as he ascended. Haruto shouted after him and together they rushed upward. As they neared the hole, Haruto called out to Ria. She opened her eyes and saw him reaching out as he shouted that he was right there, but his future self urged him to stay calm, explaining that the inside of the spacetime hole was cut off from a world's causality principles, meaning only spacetime magic would be effective. His future self then rushed into the hole, telling Haruto that he would use space-time magic to push Ria out, so Haruto should be ready to catch her. Positioned behind Ria, his future self gathered all his space-time power in both hands, pushing with all his strength to force her out. Ria moved closer to the edge of the hole and Haruto waited with blurred vision, straining to see her. She called out to him, "Big brother," but then to his horror the hole began to close. Shocked, Haruto shouted to his future self asking what was happening. His future self yelled back, equally stunned, that it was far too soon for the hole to start closing. Panic set in as he saw how fast the hole was shrinking, with Ria dangerously close to being trapped. Desperate, his future self used every ounce of his power to keep the hole open, shouting for Haruto to pull Ria out quickly. Haruto responded with a determined yes and used his space-time magic to pull her closer. Ria drew nearer while his future self struggled to hold the hole open. His future self reminded him that if Ria's body got caught in the closing hole, she would be torn apart. Even if she made it out and escaped, she would fall to the ground and die if he failed. Haruto focused intently, replying that he understood. As Ria finally emerged from the hole and began to fall, she reached out to him and he reached back. He successfully grabbed her hand and pulled her close, then shouted to his future self to hurry and get back, but there was no response. Confused, Haruto asked what was wrong and urged his future self to hurry. His future self, however, smiled and told him, "This is where they say goodbye." Haruto, bewildered, asked what he meant. His future self explained that he had reached his limit and could no longer maintain that form. He added that he had used up all the Chronos factor stored within and with that last stunt and didn't have the power to return to where he came from. Haruto tried to speak, but his future self interrupted, calling his name seriously. He told Haruto that he hadn't been a very good disciple, often complaining, making silly mistakes, and just when he seemed to show signs of growth, his emotions would pull him back, leading to more blunders. But despite all that, he had no regrets, fighting alongside him because Haruto was such a humane, kind-hearted person. His future self then informed him that the space-time hole would never open again, making this their final goodbye. Haruto, devastated, shouted for him to wait, insisting it couldn't be happening. But his future self entrusted his hopes to Haruto, telling him to save their world in his place. Clenching his teeth in pain, Haruto tearfully agreed, promising to take on the responsibility. His future self laughed softly, reminding him that it was a promise. Turning to Ria, his future self reassured her that she was safe now, calling her young lady. Ria, however, asked if he might also be her brother. This question surprised his future self, and he remembered how warm, lovely, and sweet Ria had been to him. Smiling gently at her, he welcomed her home. Then as the space-time hole finally closed, Haruto's future self vanished along with it. When the hole was completely gone, Haruto clutched his chest in agony and cried out loudly, mourning the loss of someone so important to him at that moment. Haruto had both triumphed and experienced profound loss. The day after completing the Tokyo Tower Sky Castle dungeon, Haruto walked into his classroom at the Adventure Cultivation Agency's high school division. He was shocked when the ladies in the room rushed toward him, excitedly telling him they had been waiting for him. Confused, he noticed that even his third-year seniors were present. One of the girls stepped forward and on behalf of the Yuga Victims Association, expressed their deepest gratitude, with all of them thanking him. The girls then began talking about how relieved they were that the infuriating sex offender Yuga had been beaten to a pulp and how they no longer had to cry themselves to sleep. One of the girls pointed at him, shouting that Haruto was their savior in question, who had even given him the nickname God of Plagues. Awkwardly and stutteringly, he asked them to stop, thinking to himself that he just wanted to lead a quiet, peaceful life. Suddenly, someone approached him and he was surprised to see that it was Yuzuki. She bowed and told him that as a representative of the student council, she wanted to apologize for the incident involving the president. He reassured her that there was no need to worry about it since it had nothing to do with her, but she insisted that she couldn't just let it go, especially since she was soon to become the new student council president. Looking directly at him, Yuzuki asked if he would like to pitch in and help the school from within. Leaving him confused, she explained that she was recruiting people for the student council and requested that he guide the students as the leader of the student council's mage security guard. The entire class was excited upon hearing her request, but Haruto declined, explaining that he was fine as he was and would pass on the offer, shocking Yuzuki. She then grabbed his hand, begging him, saying she would do anything if he agreed. Rin couldn't believe Yuzuki was approaching Haruto in such a way and was dizzy with shock, stutteringly calling out his name. Akin tried to reassure Rin, telling her it was okay. One of the girls then reminded Yuzuki that class was about to begin and gently pushed her away from Haruto. Before leaving, Yuzuki shouted that they would pick up the conversation at lunch break and ordered him to stay in the classroom, citing her new authority as the student council president. Haruto sighed and scratched his head in exasperation. During the lunch break, Haruto was on the rooftop, sitting on a bench and checking the system. He noticed that his level was 98 rank C in the system. Recommended that he upgrade to adventurer rank, and his skills included swordsmanship at level 64 and space-time magic at level 82. With high overall stats, he also saw that he had acquired 5 new spells, thinking to himself that with those stats he felt unbeatable. It made sense considering the many enemies he had defeated. He was then surprised to see that his total credits amounted to 43 million, a sum far beyond what any typical high school student should have. As he was eating his burger, he heard the sound of people rushing to the rooftop. Yuzuki barged in, loudly asking where he was, and the girls began searching the area, but couldn't find him. Frustrated, Yuzuki angrily reminded the others that she had told Haruto to stay in his classroom, deciding to check the gym next. They left the rooftop without noticing him in the top peacefully eat while watching them leave. Jumping down, Haruto knew he would have to come up with some plan to handle situations like this where it would be tough for him moving forward. He then turned around on the bench to ask his future self for advice, but when he looked, he realized his future self was no longer there. The memory of his older self's absence hit him again. After classes, Haruto headed back to his apartment carrying a bag of food. He walked upstairs and entered the code on his apartment door. As he opened the door, he was stunned to hear Ria shout that he was late and that she had been waiting for him for a long time. She then sweetly welcomed him home, to which he smiled and responded, "Your big brother is home." Ria proudly showed him the food she had prepared and declared that it was a homemade meal from his cute little sister, leaving him amazed. Then noticing the bag in his hand, she asked if he had bought something from the convenience store. He glanced at it, realizing that he had picked it up out of habit. Ria gently scolded him, saying that he should refrain from buying unnecessary things on his own. He nodded, acknowledging her point. She then reminded him that they would be living together from now on and needed to economize. Surprised by this revelation, he agreed, promising to do just that. Ria stepped closer to him, smiled softly, and once more welcomed him home. He was taken aback for a moment, the memory of his future self welcoming Ria home flashing through his mind. He smiled and told her it's good to be home. He placed the plastic bag on the table, as Ria suddenly remembered something. Before they had dinner, they both went over to their family picture. Ria thanked their parents for raising them and begged them to continue watching over them, making him smile warmly at his little sister. Then Ria noticed the scarf she had made for him. She couldn't believe he had kept it all this time, and he replied, "Of course I did." She reminded him that it was June, the middle of summer, but he playfully told her that he gets cold easily, as she knows after he finished changing his clothes. They both sat down at the table. Ria proudly presented the meal as her homemade cooking. He smiled, thanked her for the meal, and took a bite. She eagerly asked him how it was and if he liked it. He responded that it was absolutely delicious. Ria still couldn't believe she was really back and asked him if she was truly home. He reassured her, saying she's truly home. He also mentioned that he had properly submitted the necessary documentation to the government office, informing them that his little sister was, in fact, alive. She thanked him and mentioned that she had lost 2 years and needed to catch up on her studies. Haruto added that this included her dance academy. Worried, she asked if it would be okay financially. He told her not to worry about it at all. Not now and not ever again, even in the very distant future. He teased that she could attend the dance academy even after she became a granny. Ria laughed and asked what that even meant. She then looked to her side and stared at the teddy bear, asking if it was right that they owed it all to the version of him from the future. Haruto confirmed this, saying that they indeed had a lot to be grateful for. He then remembered his future self, entrusting him with the task of saving the world, making him stare at the teddy bear, wondering how he should go about it. At that moment, Ria recalled something in her pocket. She remembered that it was inside her clothes when he rescued her, pulling out a small glowing cube. She asked if he knew what it was. Haruto was surprised to see that it was a message cube. As soon as he activated it, the cube released a bright light, and his teddy bear, now possessed by the essence of his future self, appeared. Shocking him, his future self began speaking through the teddy, saying that if Haruto was seeing this message, it meant he was no longer in the world. He also guessed that Haruto was probably at a loss, wondering how exactly to save the world now that his future self was gone. Naruto listened in disbelief as his future self confidently explained that being the strongest peerless warrior, He had made proper preparations in case something like this happened. Then with a bit of smugness, his future self asked if Haruto agreed that he was totally awesome, and told him to feel free to offer some praise. Haruto couldn't help but think that his future self shouldn't be so smug. Even in a message, his future self then turned serious, informing Haruto that he would transfer a letter from the future version 2 to his storage. He urged Haruto to rely on it to save the world and called him a savior, asking if he understood the message. Cube then shut off, transferring the letter for becoming a space-time age version 2 into his storage. The system appeared in front of him, displaying a message from his future self, reminding him not to slack off just because he was no longer around to keep an eye on him. Seeing his future self in the system lifted his spirits, and he smiled. Ria, noticing his reaction, asked if people were really calling him a savior nowadays, and commented on how cool it sounded. He shrugged it off, replying that it was nothing, just a result of various things coming together. Meanwhile, at the Adventurer Guild's general headquarters, a meeting was taking place on the top floor where the 7 sages, S-rank adventurers, were gathered. The chief of the Minato branch, Kuridan, also known as Iron, addressed the group. He suggested they move on to the next topic on the agenda, the eradication of the Chaos Dragon at Nakano's train yard. The unauthorized entry into the Shinjuku branch's synthesis facility, which was restricted to adventurers rank D or higher, and the unauthorized raiding of Tokyo Tower's Sky Castle dungeon. He emphasized that these 3 criminal offenses, all occurring within the last few days, were highly likely perpetrated by the same individual, and they must immediately identify the culprit. The 5th sage, known as the King of Kings, Tantalum, responded, questioning whether the Sky Castle dungeon had been properly investigated, as it might be equivalent to an S-rank dungeon. The 2nd sage, Platinum, also known as the Oracle Deliverer, asked if a single trespasser had really managed to raid such a dungeon. The 6th sage, Kyo Murmas, known as the Exalted Magic Swordsman, replied that it seemed impossible. The 3rd sage, 15 at Oas, remained silent throughout the discussion. The 1st sage, Q, also known as the Omni Elemental, remarked that such actions could be seen as a challenge to the Adventurer Guild's authority, which he found quite interesting. The 4th sage, Siren, also known as the Psycho Witch, laughed in wonder what kind of darkness the perpetrator might harbor. Finally, the 7th sage, Tellurium, known as Akashic Vision, stated that an observation target had been acquired. Kerrigan then addressed the group, stating that he believed all 7 sages understood the gravity of the current situation. He proposed that as soon as they identified the unknown adventurer, they should recruit them to join the guild's executive staff, and prepare them to serve as a warrior in the upcoming other world war. With that, Kirgain declared the 7 sages meeting adjourned. The next day, on a peaceful street, a mother and her child were walking happily together. The mother became distracted by the beautiful flowers growing on the side of the road, while the child, captivated by a brightly colored blue butterfly, began to chase after it without her mother noticing. As the child ran into the road, a truck sped toward her, and the driver shouted in shock upon seeing the child and his path. The mother heard the truck's horn blaring and, horrified, saw her daughter standing in the middle of the road. She rushed toward her child, but it was too late. The truck was about to hit her. The child's balloons flew into the air, and the scene was on the brink of tragedy. But then in an instant he appeared, Haruto, standing in front of the mother, holding the child safely in his arms. The mother was shocked, unable to comprehend what had just happened. When she confirmed that the child was indeed her daughter, she rushed to them, tears streaming down her face. Haruto gently asked the child if she was scared, and softly reassured her not to worry, because she's safe now. Haruto gently put the child down, and the little girl thanked him. Her mother immediately hugged her, shouting how relieved she was that her daughter was safe. Haruto smiled, thinking how he had managed to save the child just in time. When he first noticed her, he feared he wouldn't make it, but with the help of his space-time magic, he did. Though the girl's balloon and his drink were sacrificed in the process, it was a small price to pay for saving a life. He clenched his fist, feeling a sense of satisfaction and using his powers for good. The mother looked at him and said she would be right there to thank him properly, but Haruto waved it off, telling her it wasn't necessary. She insisted, saying that such an act couldn't go unnoticed and that he should at least tell her his name. However, Haruto politely declined, saying he would rather she forget the whole thing, because he didn't want to stand out any more than he already did. Grabbing his school bag, he informed them that he had to run, making the mother shout for him to wait, but he dashed off at speed, knowing he would be late if he didn't hurry. A moment later, he arrived at the Adventure Cultivation Agency's high school division. He jumped from building to building until he landed safely on his classroom rooftop. Glancing down, he saw the student council gathering at the entrance, asking each other if they had seen Haruto. He sighed in frustration and headed to his classroom, but he couldn't help but notice the whispers and stares from his classmates. He felt awkward, thinking that he didn't even need to use his flow of time skill to know he was being watched like crazy. Meanwhile, Rin was observing him from the side, feeling as if he was slipping out of her reach. Just like that time she had run into him after leaving the Adventurers Guild, she recalled the moment at the Shinjuku Metropolitan Government Office branch of the Adventurers Guild. There she had introduced herself as a student from the Cultivation Agency School in the Nakano district, reporting that she had completed a B-rank dungeon exploration. The man at the counter thanked her for her hard work, and as she prepared to leave, he suddenly asked if a student named Haruto attended her school. Surprised, she replied that there was indeed a student she knew by that name. The man explained that Takemine from a weapon synthesis laboratory had developed a new weapon synthesis theory, which was based on something called the Kazu theory. He added that when he asked Takemine about it, Takemine mentioned that a student from Nakano had given him a clue that helped him develop the theory. The man remarked that it sounded pretty far-fetched. Rin stared at Haruto, wondering just how far he was going to go. After their class, the professor dismissed them for the morning, reminding them about the exchange student who would be joining them next week. During the lunch break, Naruto was back on the rooftop, reviewing the messages his future self had left for him. One of the messages played with his future self, advising him to first hone his skills as a swordsman. In the end, the message said, "Space-time magic is only an auxiliary support type of magic. His true talents lay in his sword, and if you want to become a great space-time mage like him, he must first live by the sword. There will come a time when you'll understand why he's telling him this, but for now that's all." The message then disappeared, and Haruto lay on the bench, thinking how cryptic his future self always was. He wished his future self would explain things more thoroughly. Elsewhere, someone strong had appeared at their school. The man used his stealing steps and flash stride skills to magically reduce the distance as he moved. Haruto was suddenly shocked when he sensed the presence, and when he looked back he saw a man appear in the top of rooftop. Instantly, Haruto drew his sword from his storage and stood to face the man, demanding to know who he was. The man, who was none other than Karyu Muramasa, the sixth sage and exalted magic swordsman, asked Haruto if he was that anon and stated that he wanted to borrow his strength. Muramasa then looked at him seriously and said, "The destruction of the world is almost upon us." Haruto realized he hadn't sensed Muramasa's presence at all until he was right in front of him. This was no ordinary person. Muramasa wasn't just your average Joe. Haruto then asked Muramasa if he really meant the destruction of the world and what exactly he was talking about. Muramasa replied that it was just as it sounded. In the near future, everything Haruto held dear would be reduced to nothing and disappear. This shocked Haruto, who immediately thought of Ria. He pointed his sword at Muramasa, stating that he couldn't just believe such a claim, especially since he didn't even know who Muramasa was or what kind of person he might be. He added that Muramasa had suddenly shown up out of nowhere and started making what he could only interpret as coercive statements, reminding him of a certain someone, his future self, whom he didn't particularly like. Haruto then declared that he would conduct himself according to his own independent thoughts and make his own decisions. Muramasa smiled at this and pulled out a picture, asking Haruto if he still felt the same after seeing it. Haruto snapped when he realized the picture was of Ria practicing dance. In a surge of anger, he unleashed a powerful aura, which surprised Muramasa. It wasn't just any fighting spirit. It was an abnormal one. However, Muramasa recognized that Haruto had the makings of a true swordsman. He assured Haruto that he had only taken the photo as part of a background check and hadn't laid a finger on his sister. Muramasa then drew his sword, swearing on his sword master's name that he meant no harm. He swiftly walked past Haruto, adding that if it took a match to convince him, he would gladly oblige. This only made Haruto angrier. He told Muramasa that he had crossed the line. Muramasa jumped back, warning Haruto that whatever happened next, he shouldn't regret it later. As they prepared to fight, Muramasa used his killing intent skill. Haruto was shocked to see that there was no Chronos factor surrounding Muramasa, meaning he wouldn't be able to see the flow of time. Noticing Haruto's silence, Muramasa asked if something was wrong and told him that ready or not, he was coming. Muramasa then disappeared in a blur and reappeared right in front of Haruto. Shocking him, Muramasa explained that his killing intent didn't mean revealing his intentions to kill, but rather the opposite. It meant killing his own aura or presence. Muramasa then swung his sword at Haruto, who barely managed to jump, twist in the air, and evade the attack. Haruto realized that Muramasa's killer's intent was removing the Chronos factor from his immediate surroundings. Haruto asked Muramasa why he was explaining how his skills worked, jokingly wondering if he was some half-wit villain from a manga. Muramasa calmly replied that he was telling him because he could still win, even after giving away his secrets. He explained that by killing his presence, he could seize the initiative from his opponent. Suddenly, Muramasa appeared behind Haruto without him noticing. As Haruto turned to face him, Muramasa swung his sword, managing to slash him. Muramasa smiled, thinking he had won. But then to his shock, Haruto's figure slowly faded away. It had been a clone created using his avatar replay skill. The real Haruto appeared behind Muramasa and swung his sword down. But Muramasa bent his body just in time to dodge the attack. Wondering what was going on, frustrated that he hadn't landed the hit, Haruto watched as Muramasa jumped back to create distance. Muramasa, still confused, realized that he should have caught Haruto for sure, and wondered if it was more than just a mirror after image. As Muramasa stood up, 2 buttons fell off his coat. Due to the force of Haruto's earlier attack, seizing the moment, Haruto used his quick body skill to dash toward Muramasa at high speed. As he swung his sword, Muramasa, realizing the power Haruto possessed, smiled. Thinking this was getting interesting, Muramasa blocked Haruto's sword with his own, and the power between their weapons caused sparks to fly. Muramasa looked at Haruto, asking what he would do next. Haruto, realizing he couldn't rely on seeing the flow of time, decided to use a different technique. He pushed Muramasa's sword slightly and activated his stop chain skill, which immobilized Muramasa and his sword. Muramasa was shocked as he found himself restrained. Haruto gathered some of his power into his fist, and Muramasa was even more surprised when Haruto bent down to the side and launched a punch using his Chrono Fist skill. Stunned for a moment, Muramasa let go of his sword and managed to activate his Steel Body skill just in time. Haruto's punch collided with Muramasa, causing a loud explosion between them and sending Muramasa flying. Though he remained unscathed, Muramasa marveled at the power of Haruto's attack. Realizing it wasn't just a random punch, he then stared at Haruto. Recognizing him as an awakened one, Haruto cursed in frustration. Realizing that even his last attack had been ineffective, he was confused when Muramasa suddenly suggested they stop. Muramasa then walked calmly toward Haruto, sincerely apologizing for what he had said about his sister. He bowed deeply, begging for forgiveness for his willful trespass, and swearing never to do anything like it again. Haruto was stunned and asked what was going on. Muramasa simply grabbed his sword and stated that he would be leaving now. Haruto shouted after him, demanding to know why he was deciding this on his own, and insisting that their match wasn't over yet. Muramasa replied that, of course, it wasn't settled and they should continue it at his school. Haruto, more confused than ever, asked what he meant by his school. Muramasa explained that Haruto had a unique talent but was still too weak and hadn't reached the level Muramasa wanted him to be in. He suggested that they learn the mysteries of the sword at his school to help Haruto become stronger. Haruto then remembered his future self's message, telling him that his true talent lay in the sword, and that if he wanted to become a great space-time mage, he had to first live by the sword. Haruto reminded Muramasa that he still couldn't trust him. Just like that, Muramasa agreed, but pointed out that he was definitely stronger than Haruto right now, asking if that was a reason enough. Muramasa then told Haruto that he would be waiting for him at his school before disappearing. Confused, Haruto felt something in his pocket and pulled out an exchange student permit between his school and Asabu's school. He realized that Muramasa must have slipped it into his pocket during their fight. Understanding that Muramasa was referring to Asabu as his school, Haruto furiously thought that Muramasa definitely had a way of getting under his skin. Meanwhile, Muramasa stood at the entrance of the school adjusting his coat. He thought to himself that Haruto was the real deal. Before the 7 sages had the chance to use Haruto as a disposable pawn, Muramasa was determined to train him well. Then once Haruto joined the 7 sages, he would help him overthrow them and seize their power. Muramasa silently vowed to thwart Kurigan's plans. On the rooftop, Haruto examined the exchange student permit. It stated that the objective was to improve the true strength of adventurers from every school. The duration was listed as July 1st to 13th, 2054. The application requirements included being a student enrolled in a school affiliated with the Adventurer Cultivation Agency, with student council members receiving greater treatment and perks at the exchange school. As he was reading, Yuzuki suddenly burst onto the rooftop, shouting that she had found him and that today for sure he would be joining their student council. Haruto stood up, saying that her timing was perfect, and casually told Yuzuki that he was in. He froze in shock, stunned that he had actually agreed to join the student council. A week later, at the Adventurer Cultivation Agency's Asabu branch, Haruto was walking with Yuzuki. She expressed how impressed she was, not only because he had joined the student council, but also because he wanted to accompany her to Asabu's school as an exchange student. He replied that it was a given as a student council member, though in truth he was mostly motivated by the grade of perks mentioned in the document. Yuzuki explained that Asabu's school was known for producing many S-rank adventurers and was regarded as the finest education and training institution in Japan. She added that it was a super elite school, requiring a magic deviation value of over 70 for admission. Before entering the building, Yuzuki turned back to him excitedly, encouraging him to do their best so as not to fall behind. He stutteringly agreed, feeling a bit overwhelmed as they stepped inside and found themselves in a huge lounge. Yusuke suggested they greet the board chairman first. As they walked through the lounge, Haruto noticed the students inside were eyeing them curiously, wondering where these two strangers had come from. But he decided not to worry about it and resolved to move at his own pace. Yusuke, noticing his discomfort, stutteringly reassured him that there was no need to be afraid because she was right there with him. He agreed but couldn't help wondering if Yusuke would really be alright in his place on the 20th floor. They arrived at the board chairman's office. Yusuke pointed it out and Haruto knocked on the door. When they entered, Muramasa was sitting in the middle of the room waiting for them. He introduced himself as the school's board chairman, leaving Haruto in disbelief that this was really Muramasa's school. Muramasa stood up and welcomed them to Asabu's school, explaining that amidst these times when mages were at their golden age, the school strictly specialized in cultivating swordsmanship. Even within the adventure cultivation agency, they were one of a kind. He added that instead of magic duels, sword duels were conducted. And throughout the exchange student program, he expected them to rise to the top of the school's rankings. Through dueling, Haruto was shocked when Muramasa directly pointed at him, but before he could react, Yusuke stutteringly told Muramasa to wait a minute, insisting that nothing like that was supposed to be part of the exchange student program activities. However, Haruto asked Muramasa if he would be able to fight him again if he participated, leaving Yusuke confused and stuttering, asking what he meant by again. Muramasa explained that the student who reaches the first place in the rankings earns the right to challenge the strongest individual at Asabu's school himself. Haruto, thrilled by this, declared that this was exactly what he wanted to hear and that he would climb to the top and defeat Muramasa as quickly as possible so he could go home sooner. Shocking Yusuke and making her panic, Haruto told Muramasa that his only complaint was that their previous fight had ended halfway and that once they settled it, he wouldn't have any reason to stay. Muramasa replied that he had no problem with that and that the school respected any swordsman aiming for the top, regardless of their attitude or stance. Muramasa then opened a system and provided them with the school student IDs and class schedules, explaining that with these they would be able to access the school's facilities and equipment. Enjoying greater perks as student council members, Naruto saw that his swordsman course adventure level was 98, placing him at 395th out of 14,000 in Asabu's school ranking. With access to greater privileges, he wondered if the rankings system worked the same as Nakano's, wondering whether he should challenge higher-ranked students, one after the other, to rise quickly. After settling everything, Muramasa wished them success and said goodbye. As they walked down the corridor, Yusuke exclaimed that the situation was outrageous, asking how she was supposed to aim for the top of the school rankings. Haruto agreed, telling her that there was no need for the newly appointed Miss President to do that in the first place. He then thought about the quickest way to move up the rankings, considering places where high-ranking students might gather, such as special lecture halls, student council rooms, dual arenas, the martial arts club building, the lessons building of the cafeteria, the event hall, and even the board chairman's office. With a determined smile, Haruto decided to visit those places. A moment later, in the cafeteria on the second floor of the Adventure Cultivation Agency, a crowd of students gathers to eat. Yusuke asks him if he forgot to have breakfast that morning, to which he simply replies yes. Suddenly a virtual robot appears beside them, welcoming them and asking if they are exchange students from another part of Japan. The robot explains that the school's motto is, "Your breakfast determines your entire day," and encourages all students to have a hearty breakfast. If they didn't get a chance to eat at home, they were welcome to enjoy as much as they want here. He notices that a holographic maid is scanning their student IDs and playing targeted announcements for them. Yusuke, surprised by the lavish menu, asks if everything is free, marveling at how well-funded schools really are. She picks up a pair of tones and declares that it's time for a thorough inspection. He encourages her to go ahead and she begins examining the food. Delighted by the full automation and perfectly balanced menu of nutrients and calories, she exclaims that this is her dream cafeteria, the one she's only imagined until now, and insists that they need to adopt this system at their own school. Immediately, as he observes the new student council president's eccentricity, he's reminded of his real reason for coming to the cafeteria. Suddenly a loud crash catches his attention, followed by a man's voice, sneering that someone else has something unworthy of them. Looking to the side, he sees a group of men harassing a lone student. The student nervously asked them to stop, but the group's leader scoffs, saying it would be a waste on a wuss like him. As he holds up a sword, the student begs them to give it back, but the leader yells for him to shut up, claiming this is his punishment for sitting in the radio faction seats without permission. Just as Haruto's suspected bullies are present, even here he knows that no matter how elite a school is, there will always be people like this, and teachers can't be everywhere. School cafeterias are common hotspots for this behavior, but he feels fortunate to encounter them right away. It means he can deal with them sooner. The leader taunts the student, saying he's not allowed in the cafeteria unless his ranking is at least in the 2-digit range, and mockingly asks if he didn't know that rule. The student stammers that seating shouldn't matter in the cafeteria, but the leader grabs him, shouting that it does, calling him the god of plagues with 0 magic capacity, a phrase that surprises Haruto. The leader then shoves the student to the floor, and the crowd laughs at the scene, which prompts Haruto to decide it's time to step in. The leader smirks, taunting the student by saying that giving him the sword would be like casting pearls before swine, so he'll keep it instead. One of the other bullies mentions that the sword looks valuable, and if they take it to the guild shop, the Rado faction's budget will skyrocket. The leader waves his hand dismissively, telling the man he can leave, but the man, stammering yet defiant, shouts back, demanding the return of his sword, explaining that it's a precious possession given to him by his father. This angers the leader, who throws a punch, yelling that he doesn't care about the man's personal circumstances. The man braces himself, tilting his head to take the hit, only for the leader's punch to be stopped midair. Haruto has stepped in, blocking the punch with a single hand, leaving both the leader and the victim stunned. The leader yells, demanding to know who Haruto is, shocked that his punch was stopped so effortlessly. Haruto calmly replies that he's an exchange student from Nakano school, and he's looking for the student with the highest rank in the school. He then asks the leader directly where he can find that person. The leader, defiant, shouts that he has no reason to give him that information. In response, Haruto tightens his grip on the leader's fist, forcing him to his knees and making him cry out in pain. Haruto insists, saying that the quickest way to find the top-ranked student is to ask someone hot-blooded like him. The leader's minions panic, asking Haruto what he just did and what he wants, but Haruto only glares at them, repeating his question about where he can find the highest-ranking student. The leader, now visibly terrified, hesitates. Suddenly a booming voice interrupts, saying, "That's enough." A sword is launched toward Haruto, and he barely jumps back in time to dodge it. Looking up, Haruto senses the faint impression of an invisible blade aimed at him, as if it nearly sliced him. The true leader of the Rado faction, Rado Nobunaga, has arrived with his members. Nobunaga sternly warns Haruto not to bully his fellow students. Rado Nobunaga, a third-year student who ranks third in the swordsman course at Azabu School, is also the head of the Kishin swordplay style school, and the leader of the Radio faction. Although the school administration struggles with his unruly behavior, Nobunaga's skill level is nearly equal to that of the top-ranked student, making him a strong candidate for a future teaching position. Upon completing the program, the Bullet Man can hardly believe that Nobunaga, known for his formidable reputation, is now facing off with an exchange student. Nobunaga then asks how things escalated to this point, to which Haruto calmly responds that the faction members were bullying a student, pointing at the victim, and that he only stepped in to stop it. Annoyed, Nobunaga turns to his men, asking if it's true the bullies deny it, claiming the exchange student is lying and that they were only trying to reserve seats for the faction. Frustrated, Nobunaga approaches his men and punches one of them, then strikes the others, leaving all three on the floor. Nobunaga snaps that he can tell they're lying by the shiftiness in their eyes. He then picks up the student's sword, bows, and apologizes for the trouble his faction members have caused. As the faction leader, he expresses his sincere regret on their behalf. Haruto assures Nobunaga there's no need to apologize, saying it's not a concern. Nobunaga then returns the sword to the man, who accepts it gratefully and thanks Nobunaga. Haruto is surprised that someone so upright and straightforward leads the faction, standing up. Nobunaga remarks that he'd have preferred to leave things peacefully and enjoy the day, but letting this incident go unanswered would damage the faction's dignity. He therefore challenges Haruto to a duel and asks if he'll accept. The bullet student, visibly worried, advises Haruto to refuse, reminding him that Nobunaga is ranked third in the school. Haruto, however, accepts the challenge without hesitation, telling Nobunaga he'll gladly take him on. Nobunaga thanks him, saying this makes things easier, and walks away, adding that he'll be waiting at the arena after classes. As Nobunaga walks away, Haruto watches him for a few moments. The bullet student approaches Haruto, stammering with concern, asking if he'll really be alright. The student, visibly shaken, explains that Nobunaga is the third-ranked swordsman and asks why Haruto would take on such a risky challenge. Haruto responds by asking the student if he's okay with how things are. He points out that if left unchecked, those bullies will harass him for the rest of high school. The man, tightly gripping his sword, replies that he's used to enduring it and hopes it will eventually stop. The sword begins to emit magic, making Haruto notices it activating as eye of time. He recognizes the magic inside the sword. Haruto then challenges him directly, saying he's addressing the real person inside him, and asks how he felt when his sword was stolen. The man looks confused, so Haruto explains that even though he knew he couldn't win, he still acted driven by something deeper. The man is momentarily speechless, and Haruto, frustrated, asks if he's truly content with letting things stay as they are. After a pause, the man admits that he doesn't want to endure it anymore. He wants to stand up to them and keep his sword safe. Haruto smiles, then praises him for his resolve, then asks for his name, extending a hand. The man shakes it and introduces himself as Mitsurugi Ibuki. Haruto introduces himself in return, then encourages Ibuki to challenge the leader of the bullies to a duel. Though Ibuki looks shocked, Haruto reassures him, bowing to make sure he wins. He tells Ibuki that they should both aim for victory in their respective matches, to which Ibuki nods in agreement. Just then Haruto's phone buzzes. With a flood of messages, it's Yuzuki asking where he's gone and complaining that she's still eating, prompting him to sigh in exasperation. Later in the waiting room of the arena, Yuzuki bursts in shouting, asking what Haruto was thinking. By agreeing to a sword duel on his first day as an exchange student, he tries to calm her down, simply replying that a lot happened, which only frustrates her more. She demands to know if he really thinks that explanation is enough. Haruto counters by reminding her that the board chairman himself had encouraged them to aim for the top ranking, which led him to think the quickest way to rise up would be to directly challenge the third-ranked student. Yuzuki, holding her head in exasperation, says she's surprised it was so easy for him to arrange a duel. Haruto then mentions that his goal is to reach first place in the rankings so he can challenge the board chairman directly, defeat him, and then head home immediately afterward. Ibuki, overhearing, is stunned by his boldness and asks if he's serious. But then, calming down, Ibuki admits that if anyone could pull it off, it might be Haruto, adding that if he defeats the board chairman, it would be a historic achievement for Azabu School. Ibuki also mentions that he might even earn the legendary skill cube. Intrigued, Haruto asks what a skill cube is, as it's the first he's heard of it. Ibuki explains that Kyo Kagemitsu, the school's founder, achieved mastery over the sword's mysteries and encoded them within a skill cube. This revelation surprises Haruto. Recalls Muramasa telling him to unlock the sword's mysteries at this school. Haruto asks Ibuki what's inside the cube specifically, and Ibuki explains that it contains a unique sword skill that only Kagemitsu himself ever mastered, the dimensional/stun. Haruto asks if this technique truly allows one to cut through dimensions. Ibuki nods, adding that while it's only rumored, no one has ever actually seen it in action. Haruto wonders if the skill could help his future self. Feeling even more determined not to lose the duel, clenching his fist, he declares his newfound motivation and fighting spirit. But first he tells Ibuki that he will be the opening act. Ibuki stutters but agrees nervously, saying he'll do his best. Ibuki then mentions that the bully was furious when he challenged him to a duel, asking Haruto if he has any secret plan to ensure his victory. Haruto reassures him, saying if he follows his instruction, he'll definitely win. He then asks Ibuki to show him his sword. Later in the arena, at the Adventure Cultivation Agency's Asabu branch, students gather around the stage cheering as Ibuki and his opponent, the bully, face off. The bully points his sword at Ibuki, calling him a fool for challenging him. He taunts Ibuki, promising to beat him black and blue, which visibly rattles Ibuki, but he remains silent in the crowd. Yuzuki watches nervously and asks Haruto if Ibuki will really be alright. Haruto confidently assures her that Ibuki will be fine and is fully capable of handling this. Moments earlier, Haruto had given Ibuki specific instructions. The moment the duel begins, he should unsheath his sword and perform a single fluid slash without hesitating. Confused, Ibuki had asked if that was truly all he needed to do. Haruto nodded, explaining that the bully would likely charge at him immediately, seeing him as an easy target. Haruto had then advised Ibuki to keep his eyes open, face forward, and execute a precise drawing slash without second-guessing himself. If Ibuki followed these steps, he would win with determination. Ibuki had agreed, saying he trusted Haruto's guidance. Back in the present, Haruto watches Ibuki from the sidelines, smiling and cheering him on, telling him he can definitely do it. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the stage, Muramasa watches the duel participants, observing the tense showdown about to unfold. The host introduced the duelists: Mitsurugi Ibuki from Class 2 Fahrenheit, ranked 324th in the swordsman course, and Kinju Kentaro from Class 2A, ranked 153rd. With a sarcastic tone, Kentaro told Ibuki that after he won, they should continue to get along. Ibuki was silent for a moment, then replied, "Got it," adding that if he happened to win, Kentaro should leave him alone for good. He then shouted, calling Kentaro a shithead, which infuriated Kentaro, who yelled back about Ibuki's nerve. The crowd was shocked by Ibuki's outburst, but Haruto simply smiled with pride. Ibuki took a deep breath, gripping his sword nervously as he positioned himself. Kentaro opened his inventory as the host announced the start of the match, drawing a second sword and pointing both at Ibuki. Haruto was surprised to see Kentaro wielding two swords, thinking that he was either highly skilled or foolish. Kentaro charged toward Ibuki exactly as Haruto had anticipated. Ibuki recalled Haruto's advice to never look away from his opponent, so he fixed his gaze firmly on Kentaro's approach. Remembering the next step, he unsheathed his sword and executed a powerful drawing slash. Kentaro, caught off guard by Ibuki's speed, tried to block with both swords, but Ibuki's attack was so quick and strong that it cut through both of them. Andrew was thrown back, crashing into the wall and coughing out blood before collapsing unconscious. His two minions were shot, while their leader Nobunaga simply sighed in disappointment. The host declared Mitsurugi Ibuki the winner, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Yusuke, amazed, told Haruto that Ibuki had really won. Haruto replied that it was expected, explaining that Ibuki's sword was actually a magic sword. Yusuke was stunned by this revelation. Earlier, Haruto had secretly used his Eye of Time skill to glimpse the sword's properties, realizing it possessed a rare special effect. Contrary to what others thought, Ibuki didn't have zero magic capacity. The sword continuously absorbed his magic, which led to his low assessment. Additionally, the magic sword had the unique trait of releasing all the magic it absorbed from Ibuki in a single burst. Since Ibuki had been carrying the sword for 3 years without defeating a monster, it had accumulated a considerable amount of power. For some reason, Ibuki didn't seem to know that his sword was magical, but Haruto knew that regardless, a win was a win. A short while later in the lounge, Ibuki excitedly thanked Haruto, saying his victory was all thanks to him. He expressed amazement at everything that had happened since Haruto's arrival, saying he'd been impressed. Over and over, Haruto downplayed his role, telling Ibuki it was all due to his own strength. He decided to tell Ibuki about the sword's magic when they had more time. Turning back, he told Ibuki it was now his turn in the arena. Back at the arena, Muramasa watched intently from above. Nobunaga told Haruto that he intended to go all out as he was fighting for the dignity of the Rado faction. Haruto replied confidently that he wouldn't have it any other way. They both unsheathed their swords, Nobunaga resting his sword on his shoulder while Haruto held his down at his side. They faced each other, a determined smile on each of their faces as they prepared to duel. As the host announced the start of the match, Haruto observed that Nobunaga remained stationary, calmly standing in place rather than making the first move. Yusuke and Ibuki watched with concern while Nobunaga's faction members, including a bandaged Kentaro, eagerly anticipated their leader's victory. Muramasa looked on silently. Haruto wondered about Nobunaga's strategy, noticing that his stance seemed to leave many openings. Though uncertain about Nobunaga's intent, Haruto resolved not to go easy on him. He dashed forward to close the distance, but was taken aback as Nobunaga began smiling, releasing a powerful and familiar pressure. Recognizing it as the same intense aura he'd encountered before, Haruto stopped himself mid-approach, activating his Eye of Time skill to analyze Nobunaga. To his surprise, he saw no Chronos factors surrounding him. He began to suspect that the top swordsman at his Abu school might use a killing intent technique rather than relying on time-based abilities, making movement predictions based on time flow ineffective. Nobunaga then advanced slowly, stopping just within range before exhaling and activating a Kishin-style secret technique. He unleashed a formless attack known as Aesthetics of Nature, which carved deep gashes into the stage floor with invisible blades that slashed in every direction. Realizing the danger, Haruto leapt upward to evade, but Nobunaga appeared above him in an instant, cutting off his escape. Haruto managed to block Nobunaga's sudden swing with his sword, tightening his grip and channeling his strength into the defense, which appeared to impress Nobunaga. Seizing the opportunity, Haruto launched a Chrono Fist toward Nobunaga's chest. Nobunaga activated Steel Body just in time, taking the blow head-on to Haruto's shock. The attack left Nobunaga completely unharmed. Both fighters then leapt back to reassess their positions. Nobunaga noted Haruto's skill in managing the invisible slashes of the Kishin style and questioned the extent of Haruto's abilities. Haruto, speechless, realized that Nobunaga had absorbed his Chrono Fist without a scratch. Nobunaga then explained that his sword style emphasized not only sword mastery but also the conditioning of the body, trained to be as resilient and sharp as a blade itself. Hearing this, Haruto took a deep breath, reminding himself to trust his instincts rather than rely on his Eye of Time in this duel. Noticing that Haruto seemed to have cleared his mind, Nobunaga adjusted his own focus. Haruto activated his quick body skill while Nobunaga employed his stealthy steps, both enhancing their speed. Haruto dashed forward, releasing a powerful slash, but Nobunaga dodged with equal swiftness, countering with a precise swing. Haruto blocked it, then spun midair to deliver another attack. Nobunaga evaded by bending backward, anchoring himself by planting his sword into the ground. Steadying himself, he followed up with a kick that sent Haruto flying. But Haruto managed to stop himself before regaining his stance. Gripping his sword tightly, Haruto acknowledged Nobunaga's strength. Fueled by determination, he stepped forward again, confident that victory would be his. Haruto swung his sword backward for more power, and launched an attack at Nobunaga, who blocked it effortlessly. Nobunaga then pushed forward, releasing a powerful slash and daring Haruto to take it head-on. Haruto swiftly jumped back to dodge, and without even touching the ground, swung his sword back for another powerful strike. Nobunaga blocked this as well. The students watching were captivated, their eyes struggling to keep up with the intense duel unfolding before them. Many marveled at Nobunaga's skill, but they also wondered who this extraordinary exchange student was. Yusuke, in a state of panic, questioned how things had escalated so quickly, shouting that they might need to review the entire exchange student program. Ibuki cheered on Haruto, while Nobunaga's faction shouted encouragement for Nobunaga. Haruto told himself that he couldn't afford to lose this match, certain that victory would be his. He needed to save his future self, and this duel was a crucial step. Nobunaga seemed to sense this determination, observing that Haruto was carrying a heavy burden. He appreciated Haruto's resolve, but knowing his own reasons, couldn't afford to lose either. Nobunaga increased the pressure surrounding them, amplifying his strength and determination, which shocked Haruto as he felt the weight of Nobunaga's intensified aura. Then, with his own heavy purpose in mind, Nobunaga dashed forward to attack. As Nobunaga moved and memories surfaced, at 8 years old he had told his mother he was leaving for school, to which she replied warmly. When he arrived at school and entered his classroom, he found his desk scrawled with hateful words, demands for him to leave, accusations of being a delinquent and poor, and hurtful slurs. His classmates mocked him, sarcastically expressing pity and pretending to wonder who could have done such a thing. Nobunaga remained silent, sitting at his desk as his classmates laughed around him. Later, back at the apartment, he overheard his mother pleading with a man to give her more time to repay a loan. The man expressed some sympathy, acknowledging that she was only a guarantor for her absent husband, yet she was left with the debt. She apologized and promised she would find a way to raise the money soon. Seeing his mother's distress infuriated Nobunaga, so he rushed to a nearby park and unleashed his anger on a punching bag he'd hung from a tree, vowing to become strong enough to change his life and protect his family. As he grew older, Nobunaga became a boxer, winning match after match. After each fight, as he collected his earnings, he would remind himself that he needed to become even stronger, strong enough to protect the people he cared about. One day, while leaving the ring, Muramasa appeared in the hallway, identifying him as the former junior high student who had risen to an undefeated champion in a world of illegal underground boxing. Muramasa asked if he was Rado Nobunaga, and Nobunaga responded with suspicion, demanding to know who Muramasa was. Muramasa replied that he had watched Nobunaga's match and noted his impressive physique, but warned that his potential would go to waste at this rate. Nobunaga bristled at the remark, demanding an explanation, and Muramasa coolly inquired whether Nobunaga sought money to support his family. Furious at the implication, Nobunaga pressed him further, but Muramasa only smiled, handing him an envelope with an invitation to learn the way of the sword under the Kishin style. As Nobunaga opened the envelope, Muramasa explained that the Kishin style was perfect for those who excel in martial arts and suggested that after mastering it, Nobunaga should seek him out. Extending a hand, Muramasa formally welcomed Nobunaga to his Abu school, an academy specializing in swordsmanship, and offered him a full scholarship to cover his tuition. Nobunaga slapped Muramasa's hand away, crumpling the envelope in mistrust, dismissing the offer as suspicious and possibly a scam. But then, as he considered the opportunity to grow stronger, he released a surge of determination and agreed, declaring that he would do anything if it meant he could achieve the strength he desired. 2 years later, Nobunaga had achieved mastery over the Kishin style, a testament to his lifelong pursuit of strength. He began to understand why Muramasa, the board chairman, had wanted him to attend a Sabu school. In a place where everything was decided by the sword, individuals with troubled pasts and rough behavior naturally gather. It became clear that Muramasa intended for Nobunaga to unite these wayward students under his leadership, and before long, he found himself in charge of the school's delinquents. Though Muramasa remained as enigmatic as ever, he had shown Nobunaga a way to earn money, allowing him to pay off his family's debt. For this, Nobunaga felt a deep gratitude. To outsiders, the rough group Nobunaga led might appear like a gang of misfits, but to him they represented other versions of himself. Flawed individuals fighting to survive as best as they knew how. With this in mind, Nobunaga shouted confidently during the match, declaring that he had no intention of losing. Catching Haruto off guard, Nobunaga then activated his Kishin-style secret technique, Scenic Beauty, which amplified the pressure emanating from his sword to a whole new level. Haruto was astonished, feeling the strength radiating from Nobunaga's blade increased dramatically. He realized that if the fight continued this way, he would be overpowered by Nobunaga's sheer force. As he locked eyes with Nobunaga, he sensed a straightforwardness in him, unmatched by any opponent he had faced before. Knowing he couldn't rely on his time flow ability, Haruto resolved to trust his own strength and the power of his sword, which had been his faithful ally in every battle. Naruto activated his Chaos Sword skill, calling upon its power to meet Nabunaga's might. Head-on, he unleashed a force that matched Nabunaga's, pouring all his energy into the blade. Recalling his future self's advice, to become a great space-time mage, he must first live by the sword. Nabunaga was caught off guard watching as Haruto laughed in exhilaration. Amid the clash, their swords collided with overwhelming force, pushing them both back. Nabunaga, understanding Haruto's joy, felt a surge of excitement himself, and they both charged forward once more, putting all their strength into their next strike. When their swords collided again, the impact caused a massive explosion, engulfing the arena in thick smoke. The crowd held its breath. Yuzuki and Ibuki looked on anxiously, as did Nabunaga's followers, all of whom were deeply concerned for their leader. Muramasa, however, remained silent, waiting calmly for the outcome. As the smoke cleared, both fighters were visible in the center of the stage. However, Nabunaga's sword lay shattered and blood seeped from his wounds. Disbelief washed over him as he realized that Haruto had cut through his steel body, a feat he had thought impossible. As Nabunaga collapsed, he conceded to himself that Haruto's sword power was boundless, perhaps even surpassing the board chairman's. The host stammered while announcing Kuju Haruto as the winner, leaving the crowd in stunned silence before erupting in disbelief. Yuzuki appeared dizzy from the shock, while Haruto stood calmly, gazing at Nabunaga as healers rushed to attend to him. Muramasa, observing the scene, was quietly impressed for Haruto to defeat Nabunaga, ranked third almost solely through swordsmanship, proved to Muramasa that Haruto was indeed the awakened one. He considered him a prime candidate for taking on the fearsome enemies that had plagued the Sabo for the past 50 years. Meanwhile, Haruto looked down at his trembling hand, reflecting on the intensity of the duel. He hadn't anticipated how thrilling the experience would be, and for a moment, he simply marveled at the joy of such a hard-fought bout. Later, outside the academy, Haruto stood speechless as Nabunaga and his group bowed to him in unison, apologizing for the trouble they'd caused. Haruto replied that it was all fine now, glancing at Ibuki, who nodded in agreement. Nabunaga then raised his head, expressing his thanks for sparing them from further complications. With a grin, he threw an arm around Haruto's shoulder, confessing that oddly enough, losing so badly felt refreshing. Haruto noted how quickly Nabunaga's mood had changed and how full of energy he seemed, but then noticing other students watching them, he stammered, urging Nabunaga to tone it down, saying he didn't want to draw any more attention. Nabunaga pulled back with a chuckle, reassuring Haruto that there was no need to be shy. He explained that since the Rado faction had officially lost to him, they would now stand by him and come to his aid whenever he needed it. Haruto, surprised by this declaration, nodded and replied that he understood, adding that he would certainly call on them if he ever found himself in a tight spot. Nabunaga enthusiastically agreed, assuring Haruto he could rely on them. The next day, in his apartment, Haruto watched the news. The broadcast reported that, according to the Metropolitan Police Department, crime rates continued to decline nationwide. Low damage from migrating monster species emerging from dungeons was increasing each year. In response, both the police and the Japan Self-Defense Force were calling for greater collaboration with the Adventurers Guild. The reporter also noted that according to statistics from the guild, Japan's GDP had sustained an annual growth rate of over 10 since dungeons began appearing worldwide 30 years ago. After paying respects to his parents, Haruto grabbed his bag as the news continued, explaining that Japan's unique population of dungeon exploration experts had given the country an economic advantage. The government had taken proactive steps, channeling subsidies toward Japanese companies and universities to develop anti-monster equipment and magic stone technology. Ria handed Haruto his lunch and he thanked her for preparing it. As he put on his shoes, she asked if he'd be attending Azabu's school again today. Haruto confirmed, explaining that he was still in the middle of a student exchange program. Ria remarked that it was nice, mentioning that the school's impressive buildings made her wish she could visit just once. Haruto chuckled, describing the school's interior as surprisingly old-fashioned, but admitting that he was being treated like royalty there. Smiling, Ria commented that it sounded wonderful for him to experience such a normal school life. Haruto felt touched seeing Ria's bright smile, and wholeheartedly agreed with her. He then asked if it was true that she'd be starting middle school that day. She confirmed, mentioning that she still only had memories from elementary school and needed to catch up. Haruto patted her head, assuring her that he would be cheering her on and that they should both do their best, silently promising to never let her feel sadness again. Later, as he walked down the street near Azabu's school, he overheard a woman shouting for someone to stop and let her go. A man was gripping her arm, demanding to know if she realized how much money he'd spent on her. Some nearby students began to murmur, recognizing the woman as Maulu, a well-known influencer with over 3 million followers, who was set to debut as a singer soon. Haruto glanced back, initially deciding it was none of his business, and continued walking away. Meanwhile, Maulu broke free, scolding the man for ambushing her and teasing him for being so shameless and trying to monopolize her. Enraged, the man warned her that there was a recently discovered dungeon nearby and it could be dangerous. But she continued to run. Lulu only stopped when she heard something unsettling ahead of her. Looking up, she saw a dungeon gate open before her, and to her horror, monsters began emerging. The creatures were imperial centipedes, classified as B-class annihilation, designated monsters with a subjugation rank of 5 and a recommended raid level of 1,200. Leaving her paralyzed with fear, Malulu fell to the ground, paralyzed by fear and crying as the monstrous centipedes advanced. The people nearby were equally horrified, panicking as they questioned why monsters had emerged outside the dungeon. Some speculated that it was one of the migrating species, and chaos erupted as everyone rushed to flee, leaving Malulu alone and trembling in terror. As one of the centipede's heads opened its massive jaws and launched toward her, the onlookers screamed, convinced she wouldn't survive. Suddenly Haruto leaped toward the monster. Just as the centipede was about to bite, the ground shattered beneath its head, which had been severed in an instant, sending a spray of green blood everywhere. The crowd was shocked as the monster writhed in pain. Haruto calmly carried Malulu away from the creature. As she opened her eyes, she was stunned to see him holding her. He gently set her down, urging her to escape quickly, and then turned to leave, leaving her speechless. Haruto stopped near the centipede, hesitating. He didn't want to get involved in more troublesome situations, but he knew he'd have trouble sleeping if he allowed these people to be slaughtered. Then, to his surprise, he saw the severed head regenerating, reattaching to the creature's body. He realized the monster had a regeneration ability. At that moment, a group of adventurers arrived. The leader of the group assessed the situation, asking if everyone was okay, and introduced their team as members of the Minato District branch of the Adventurers Guild. Spotting Haruto, they told him to step back, warning that he would be killed if he stayed. One of the adventurers reported to the leader that the monster was a B-class annihilation designated creature with a subjugation rank of S, requiring a raid level of over 1,000. The leader, visibly concerned, noted that their group's average level was only 80 and doubted they'd stand a chance. Another member suggested signaling the 7 sages for help, but the leader dismissed the idea, shouting that they wouldn't arrive in time. With no other choice, the adventurers braced themselves to fight, determined to protect the people. Despite the odds, Haruto silently watched them from a distance. Just then, one of the centipede's heads lunged toward 2 of the adventurers, who took defensive positions despite knowing they were outmatched. Fortunately, a chain materialized, halting the monster's head in midair. It was Haruto using his stop chain skill. The adventurers, bewildered, wondered aloud if they had been saved. Haruto, without concern for standing out, activated his space-time magic to tighten his grip on the creature, and then used his quick body skill, propelling himself forward at high speed. Sensing danger, the centipede tilted its head and spewed a toxic liquid at him. Haruto dodged, leaping away just in time, and noticed the ground dissolving beneath the liquid's impact. He quickly deduced that it was a corrosive poison attack and resolved to minimize collateral damage. Suddenly the monster appeared beneath him, jaws open, and bit down, seemingly cleaving him in half. But Haruto vanished like a projection, shocking the creature thanks to his avatar replay skill. He had avoided death, explaining that the version it had struck was merely an echo of himself from 0.3 seconds earlier. He seized the opportunity, swinging his sword in a powerful arc that severed the creature's head with a single strike. The adventure leader was astounded as the massive head hit the ground, and nearby Malulu watched in awe. Haruto approached the decapitated head, placing his hand above it. Using material rewind with a unique modification, he prevented the centipede from regenerating its head by forcing its neck to revert to the moment it was severed. Satisfied, he readied his sword, knowing that with this technique in place, the monster couldn't regrow that head. He took his stance, prepared to take down the 7 remaining heads.